And as you sink more deeply into this moment, into the stillness behind the words, you begin to feel the first flicker of remembrance that the thing you desire is not something you must chase, but something already within you, waiting to be seen. The ache for more, the hunger for abundance, the longing for wealth is not a sign of lack, but a call from your own buried treasure, whispering that it is time to return. You were never meant to strive. You were meant to awaken. Most will tell you that money comes by action, by effort, by systems and strategies, and the sweat of your brow. But this is the way of the outer world, the shadow play of effects. The truth is far simpler, far nearer, and infinitely more miraculous. All things, money included, come from consciousness. This is the great secret men refuse to believe. They worship the symbol and ignore the source. They chase the fruit, but never touch the root. Yet you are the root. You are the vine from which all things grow. And the state you occupy now, in this very moment, is the soil of your tomorrow. So let the old belief fall. Let the idea that you must earn or beg, or manipulate your way to wealth, be laid gently down. Feel the relief in that. For the truth, if you dare to let it in, is that you are the operant power. You are not subject to the winds of chance, or the whims of fate. You are the cause clothed in form. And the moment you accept this, not as a theory, but as a knowing, you become the one who calls money forth like Lazarus from the tomb. You are not learning how to get money. You are remembering who you are. Money is not outside you. It is not far off, delayed or dependent on others. It is a symbol of value, and all value flows from consciousness. If you embody the state of wealth, deeply, vividly, and without doubt, the outer must reflect it. This is not theory. This is law. To manifest large sums of money in 3 days or less, you must move beyond time. You must step into the place where time folds into now, where imagination reveals eternity. For time is not the obstacle, it is the servant. Time bows to the imaginal act. Most will wait and hope, and plead with life. But the awakened one assumes. To assume the state of already having, to walk in it, sleep in it, breathe in it, is to impress the infinite with your choice. And the infinite, being without resistance, responds. Do not ask how the money will come. That is not your domain. The how belongs to the unseen hand that moves all things in perfect order. Your task is to dwell in the end, to feel the texture of the fulfilled desire, to rest in the joy of already having, to occupy the mansion prepared for you before the foundations of the world. For to him that hath, it shall be given, not to him that struggles, not to him that waits, but to him that hath, to the one who inwardly possesses the state. And so you begin now. You begin by closing the eyes to the outer. You begin by choosing to believe in the inner world, more than the evidence of the senses. You begin by daring to feel wealthy before the bank account speaks. You begin by accepting that feeling is the truth, for feeling is the secret. The more vivid the inner experience, the more quickly the outer conforms. It is not repetition that brings results, but belief clothed in sensation. When you see it, feel it, and live in it inwardly, the outer must echo back your assumption. This is not mere imagination. This is creation. This is divine memory. So you rest tonight, not as one who wishes, but as one who knows. You feel the envelope in your hand, the digits in your account, the freedom swelling through your chest. You give thanks not for what might be, but for what already is in the unseen. And something strange begins to happen. A peace comes, a quiet joy, a holy indifference. No longer are you looking for signs. No longer are you doubting, or grasping, or questioning. You have chosen the state, and in choosing it you have summoned the form. The money is not coming. It is done. It is now. It is you. But what if that knowing could be made even deeper? If the seed you've just planted could begin to bloom instantly, not in theory, but in sensation? What if there's a way to collapse even the seeming gap between desire and embodiment, to awaken the sleeping riches in your very breath? There is, and the door to it is closer than your next thought. And as that truth settles in, that the money is not coming, but already yours in the unseen, you begin to feel a quiet shift within. It is not loud or dramatic. It is subtle, like a candle relit in the deepest room of the soul. The air changes. The silence grows sweeter. Something in you exhales. You are no longer waiting. You are remembering. And with that remembrance comes a new kind of power, not the forceful kind the world calls strength, but the gentle certainty of divine alignment. You are not trying to believe anymore. You are resting in belief, and that rest is the seed of all creation. This is where most falter. They imagine once, then peer anxiously into the world for evidence. They dig up the seed to see if it's growing. But you know better now. You know that the imaginal act, once accepted as real, needs no checking. It needs only stillness. Faith is not noise. It is quiet agreement. So tonight you do not ask. You assume. You do not hope. You possess. You walk through the garden of your fulfilled desire, and let your senses taste what your eyes have not yet seen. You feel the transaction before it appears. Your phone buzzes. Your hand touches the paper. Your chest lifts with relief. You feel the shift in others as they respond to your new state. Not one thing has changed in the outer, yet everything has changed within, and the outer must bow. This is why it happens quickly, sometimes within hours, sometimes within moments, because when you fully accept the inner reality, time condenses. The bridge of incidents begins to unfold not by your planning, but by your acceptance. You no longer create the path, you become the path. Do you feel that? That warmth that arises when you stop trying and start knowing. That ease is the sign you have entered the state, and from this state, all things are drawn without strain. Money is not outside of you. It is not in a vault, or in another's hands, or in some future that never arrives. Money is a reflection, and you are the mirror. You have been taught to chase reflections, to believe they are real, but the mirror has no power of its own. The image must come first, and that image is your self-concept, your dwelling place in consciousness. So you go inward again, not to escape the world, but to reorder it. And in the stillness, you whisper to yourself, not with your lips but with your heart, I am wealthy now. I am provided for now. I am lavished in supply now. I am the one who already has, not someday, not later, now. Can you feel the holy simplicity in that? No effort, no battle, just the sacred act of choosing. This is the mystery, that God, your own wonderful imagination, awaits your assumption to pour out the blessing. That before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. You are always heard. You are always responded to, not by some distant being, but by the law of your own being. For you and the Father are one. There is no separation between thought and form, between assumption and expression, except the veil of doubt, and even doubt is powerless, once you decide to dwell in the end. So you return again to that inner world, that holy temple behind your forehead, and you furnish it richly. You place the check on the table. You see the account balance glowing back at you. You hear the congratulatory words. You walk the room as one whose money is not coming, but already present. You rehearse it not as fantasy, but as fact. And this rehearsal becomes remembrance. The lines blur between what is seen and what is imagined, until both merge into one radiant truth. What you feel to be true becomes true, and yet as this inner reality solidifies, another question stirs quietly beneath the surface, one few dare to ask aloud. What if the outer world resists? What if the evidence still seems to deny your assumption? What if even as you dwell in the end, the form delays? That is where the deepest revelation waits. And as that truth settles in, that the money is not coming, but already yours in the unseen, you begin to feel a quiet shift within. It is not loud or dramatic. It is subtle, like a candle relit in the deepest room of the soul. The air changes. The silence grows sweeter. Something in you exhales. You are no longer waiting. You are remembering. And with that remembrance comes a new kind of power, not the forceful kind the world calls strength, but the gentle certainty of divine alignment. You are not trying to believe anymore. You are resting in belief, and that rest is the seed of all creation. This is where most falter. They imagine once, then peer anxiously into the world for evidence. They dig up the seed to see if it's growing. But you know better now. You know that the imaginal act, once accepted as real, needs no checking. It needs only stillness. Faith is not noise. It is quiet agreement. So tonight you do not ask. You assume. You do not hope. You possess. You walk through the garden of your fulfilled desire, and let your senses taste what your eyes have not yet seen. You feel the transaction before it appears. Your phone buzzes. Your hand touches the paper. Your chest lifts with relief. You feel the shift in others as they respond to your new state. Not one thing has changed in the outer, yet everything has changed within, and the outer must bow. This is why it happens quickly, sometimes within hours, sometimes within moments, because when you fully accept the inner reality, time condenses. The bridge of incidents begins to unfold not by your planning, but by your acceptance. You no longer create the path, you become the path. Do you feel that? That warmth that arises when you stop trying and start knowing. That ease is the sign you have entered the state. And from this state, all things are drawn without strain. Money is not outside of you. It is not in a vault, or in another's hands, or in some future that never arrives. Money is a reflection, and you are the mirror. You have been taught to chase reflections, to believe they are real, but the mirror has no power of its own. The image must come first, and that image is your self-concept, your dwelling place in consciousness. So you go inward again, not to escape the world, but to reorder it. And in the stillness, you whisper to yourself, not with your lips but with your heart, I am wealthy now, I am provided for now, I am lavished in supply now, I am the one who already has, not someday, not later, now. Can you feel the holy simplicity in that? No effort, no battle, just the sacred act of choosing. This is the mystery, that God, your own wonderful imagination, awaits your assumption to pour out the blessing. That before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. You are always heard, you are always responded to, not by some distant being, but by the law of your own being, for you and the Father are one. There is no separation between thought and form, between assumption and expression, except the veil of doubt, and even doubt is powerless, once you decide to dwell in the end. So you return again to that inner world, that holy temple behind your forehead, and you furnish it richly. You place the check on the table, you see the account balance glowing back at you, you hear the congratulatory words, you walk the room as one whose money is not coming, but already present. You rehearse it not as fantasy, but as fact, and this rehearsal becomes remembrance. The lines blur between what is seen and what is imagined, until both merge into one radiant truth. What you feel to be true becomes true, and yet as this inner reality solidifies, another question stirs quietly beneath the surface. One few dare to ask aloud, what if the outer world resists? What if the evidence still seems to deny your assumption? What if even as you dwell in the end, the form delays? Ah, that is where the deepest revelation waits. And as that question lingers, what if the scene could breathe, could pulse with life, you begin to realize something ancient yet new. The images you hold are not idle. They are living patterns, divine blueprints charged with the power of your acceptance. You are not just visualizing, you are incarnating. To imagine fully is to embody. And this is where the mystery deepens, where the sacred veil begins to lift. You are not the observer of the scene, you are inside it. The light falls on your face, the air shifts as you move. The voice you hear congratulating you is not imagined, it is remembered. This is not fantasy, this is fact on a higher plane. You are entering the state, not as a guest, but as its rightful inhabitant. So let the vision wrap itself around you, let it become more than an image. Let it become sensation, sound, emotion, knowing. This is how reality is rewritten. This is how timelines bend and conditions dissolve. Not by force, but by fullness. You are the seed taking root, and the more real you make it within, the more the world must rise to meet it. You are not convincing the outer to change. You are selecting from within the infinite field of possibilities and allowing that selection to express. What you embody must express. Just as the tree cannot hide its fruit, you cannot dwell in wealth and not see its reflection. It must show itself, not because you wish for it, but because it has no choice. The law is perfect. You will know it by the inner shift, the calm that comes for no reason, the inner smile, the silence of seeking. This is the signature of the new state. When you stop searching, you have found it. And once found, you simply remain. You hold it gently, like something sacred, not as effort, but as joy. You walk differently, not in arrogance, but in quiet certainty. You speak less of need and more of thankfulness. You no longer say I hope or I want, but I am, I have, it is done. And so it is. Feel how natural it becomes. The more you return to the scene, the less effort is required. At first you imagined the feeling, now it begins to find you. It rises on its own, like a remembered dream. The bridge of incidents unfolds, a message here, a nudge there, an impulse to act without reason, a conversation overheard. and you begin to notice how the outer world bends gently toward your assumption, but you do not chase signs. You do not hunger for evidence. You know that the imaginal act is enough. You know, as Paul wrote, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and now that unseen substance is forming in you. The texture of your inner world is changing. You walk through the day as if the thing has already occurred, because it has within, and because it has occurred within, the outer cannot deny it for long. The feeling of wealth now guides you, not to strive, but to rest, not to force, but to allow. You find yourself led with ease. You trust the irrational desire. You follow the quiet inner pull, and often without knowing how, you arrive at the place your imagination declared as real. And the money, it comes when you no longer crave it. It flows when you no longer grip it. It appears as a natural unfolding, an echo, not a cause, for you have touched the true cause. You have made your home in the end. And yet, there is one final refinement, one holy act that few ever consider, something so simple, so intimate, it is often overlooked entirely. It is not another technique, nor a repetition of what has been said. It is a secret resting not in words, but in being. It waits for you in silence, just beyond your next breath. And as you lean into that final breath, that silent moment untouched by striving, you begin to sense it, not as a thought, but as a presence, a quiet that holds all power, a stillness that births all form. It does not need to speak to be understood. It simply is, and in its being, it whispers the final revelation. You are already that which you seek. This is the holy secret, the one buried not in technique, but in identity. To manifest great sums of money is not to change the world. It is to change the assumption of who you are, not just for a moment, but as your natural tone. Your self-concept is the cornerstone of every manifestation. Until you accept yourself as one who has, every act is tinged with effort. But once you become, the world must follow. You do not attract wealth, you become wealth. You do not chase provision. You realize you are the source from which it flows. And the longer you abide in this knowing, the faster the shadows flee. It is not about thinking positively. It is about remembering the truth of your being. The world will always mirror who you believe yourself to be. It is law. And the moment you cease identifying as someone trying to get money, and instead walk as one who always had it, always was it, always embodied the energy of opulence, that moment marks the beginning of manifestation without resistance. So ask yourself softly, without judgment, who am I being now? Not what are you doing, or what are you hoping, but who are you being? Do you move as the version of you that has? Do you speak as one who already possesses? Is there effort in your inner world? Or is there gratitude? Are you waiting? Or have you arrived? To live in the end is to move from arrival. Every thought, every gesture, every glance from this state says silently, it is done. And from that still point, everything flows. This is why Jesus could say, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye have received them, and ye shall have them. The receiving precedes the having. The assumption precedes the expression. And assumption is not pretending, it is choosing, with the full consent of feeling. So you choose now again, quietly, with reverence. You choose to embody the you who never lacked, the you who walks in ease, the you who receives unexpected deposits, finds open doors, and becomes a blessing wherever they go, not because of luck, but because of alignment. And the more you lean into that identity, the more effortless it becomes, like a river returning to its course, like a song remembered in the quiet. It is not something new you must become, it is something ancient you must allow. The world cannot deny the one who walks in the fullness of already having. You will begin to notice people responding differently. Opportunities that once seemed closed will unfold like petals. You'll overhear conversations that seem placed for you. You'll receive without asking, because your very state commands it, softly, silently, irresistibly, not by demanding, but by dwelling. And yet, even here, at the threshold of ease, something even deeper waits, a layer beyond abundance, a place where money becomes more than means, a mirror, a symbol, a sacred teacher, pointing to the truth beneath all things. What if the purpose of wealth is not possession, but transformation? What if the sum you manifest in 3 days is not the end, but the beginning of something far more luminous, far more eternal? What if you are not just here to receive, but to remember that you are always the giver, cloaked in form, dreaming of lack only to awaken in fullness? And so that question glows gently within you, like a lantern lit from the inside. What if this isn't about getting, but about remembering who gives? Not the world, not circumstance, but you, the self behind the mask. The giver is not separate from the receiver. You are both. Money in its purest form is not a thing to possess, but a mirror that reveals who you believe yourself to be. And when you change your concept of self, not through effort, but through inner consent, you no longer try to manifest money. You awaken as the one who generates wealth through being. The outer becomes a loyal echo. The world yields its forms in accordance with the image you hold within. This is why your only true task is identity. Not action, not performance, not struggle, but inner selection. To manifest large sums of money in 3 days or less, you must no longer see time as a barrier, nor desire as distance. You must enter the Holy of Holies, the deep inner knowing that all states already exist, that all things are finished, that money is not in your future, but in your assumption. And the assumption must become natural. It must settle into you like breath, like the rhythm of your heart. No loud declarations are needed, no strain, no proving. Just the quiet authority of someone who knows that the tree bears fruit in its season, not because it tries, but because it is. So too must you become the fertile tree of wealth, not by effort, but by identity. Feel it now. The way your shoulders soften, the way the brow relaxes, the way the breath deepens as you surrender not to lack, but to truth. You are not trying to receive. You are allowing what has always been yours to take form. You are no longer living from the senses. You are living from the unseen. You rest in the knowing that the money is already done, already moved, already unfolding. And this rest is not laziness, it is divine alignment. To rest in the end is to act as God acts in finished things. As it is written, my word shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. You are the word made flesh, and what you assume with feeling must prosper in the outer world, for it is law. And now the feeling grows stronger. It no longer visits, it remains. You begin to carry the energy of wealth in your presence, in your gaze, in your unspoken knowing. Others notice. The atmosphere shifts. You say little, but your state says everything. This is the essence of magnetic assumption, not need, not effort, but inner fullness, so complete that the world bends to reflect it. This fullness is not pride, it is not ego, it is not inflation, it is divine memory resurfacing. You are simply returning to the truth that lack was a dream, that poverty was a forgetting, that your inheritance was never taken, only momentarily unseen. Now you see again, and the more you see, the faster the forms rearrange. What seemed impossible becomes probable. What once felt far feels near. The impossible becomes the inevitable. And yet as you rest in this divine remembrance, a new clarity dawns quietly, gently, like morning light through a curtain, a truth that changes everything, not by adding more, but by revealing what was always there. There is no such thing as delay in divine imagination. What you assume now is already yours on the invisible plane. But what if you could learn to feel that invisible world as more real than this one? What if you could walk in the unseen so vividly that the seen would rush to keep up? And as that thought takes root, that the unseen must become more real than the seen, you begin to feel the subtle shift of power returning to its rightful place. No longer does the outer dictate your state. No longer do you read the world to decide what is true. You read the truth within and let the world follow like a shadow. You begin to see with new eyes. What once appeared empty now feels full. The same bank account, the same room, the same sky. Yet everything has changed. Not outwardly, not yet, but inwardly, where all creation begins. The invisible world has become your sanctuary, your supply, your certainty. This is what it means to live by faith, not sight. And faith, as Scripture reminds, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The evidence is not the outer proof. The evidence is the feeling, the inner assurance, the sacred stillness that knows, without seeing, that it is done. And the more you dwell there, the more the world must rise to meet your state. It is not a matter of time, but of tone. The moment your tone shifts, the outer responds. The mail arrives, the phone rings, the client calls. the funds release. But none of this happens to you. It happens through you, because you have shifted the cause. You no longer plead. You no longer rehearse the lack. You no longer wonder. You have chosen. And your choice has clothed itself in feeling. It is the feeling that quickens the thing unseen into visibility. This is why we do not visualize to get, but to remember, to step into the state that already holds what we seek. The image is not the magic. The feeling of reality is, and that feeling arises not from desperation, but from embodiment. So you no longer ask, when will it come? You ask instead, how deeply can I dwell in its presence now? This is the art of assumption, to assume the state so vividly, so effortlessly, that your mind no longer questions it, that your body begins to respond to it, that your words begin to echo it, that even your silence begins to carry the fragrance of wealth, not because of what you do, but because of who you are now being. You are not the one becoming rich. You are the one awakening to your richness. You are the one who has remembered their true inheritance, one that was never earned, only accepted, and in that acceptance, the flow begins. The more you feel the reality of your desire now, the more quickly it hardens into fact. But you must let go of needing it to happen. You must let go of watching the clock. You must release the mind's need to measure or confirm. The moment you feel it is already here, time dissolves, days compress, hours fold, reality rearranges, the bridge of incidents accelerates, not because you hurried it, but because you stopped doubting. You have become the point of origin, so now you walk through the house differently. You speak about your life as if the money is already there. You respond to emails as the wealthy one. You rest at night as the one whose account overflows. And this rest, this calm, unwavering rest, is the clearest sign that your assumption is taking root. You are no longer waiting for a miracle. You are the miracle remembering itself. And yet, just as the seed surrenders to the soil, without needing to know how it will sprout, you are called to go even deeper, not to do more, but to let go more fully. What if you could drop every lingering doubt, not by force, but by trust? What if you could surrender so completely to the end result that you forget you ever lacked? What if the final step in rapid manifestation is silence? And so you arrive at the quietest threshold of all, the realm of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the fullness of trust. A silence so completed, no longer asks, no longer yearns, no longer reaches. It simply is. And in that stillness, something sacred unfolds. The desire dissolves into being. This is the holy moment, where all effort ends, and all creation begins. You are no longer rehearsing the scene. You are no longer adjusting the picture, trying to perfect the inner movie. You have entered the atmosphere of knowing, where the imaginal act has already been accepted by the deeper self, and released like a seed into fertile ground. You don't need to water it every hour. You don't need to check the soil. You need only rest. Rest, not as inactivity, but as divine assurance. Rest, as the quiet celebration of fulfillment already received. It is in this stillness that the final walls fall, the last chords of resistance, the subtle urges to check, compare, or doubt. They fade, and what remains is pure expectancy, not from hope, but from identity. The you that already possesses, already experiences, already walks through life as the one who has, is now fully seated at the center of your awareness. You have shifted timelines. You have chosen a new self, and this new self is no longer waiting. Can you feel that? The relief that washes through you, when you no longer need to make it happen. The peace that rises when you no longer argue with the world. The soft joy of knowing that creation is finished, and you have claimed your place within it. This is where miracles happen, but they no longer feel miraculous. They feel normal, natural, expected, because you have assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled until it no longer feels like a wish. It feels like life, and the outer must match. The conversation will change, the number will appear, the person will say yes, the delay will dissolve, and yet you will not be surprised. You will not celebrate as one who doubted and is now convinced. You will smile as one who always knew. You have become the thing you once desired. The money is just the echo. It arrives not as rescue, but as reflection. It shows up in ways you could not have scripted, through paths you did not plan. A gift, a refund, a cleared debt, a client you never pursued, a door that opens without your knocking. You are no longer the one who needs. You are the one who calls things into being, through stillness, through selection, through sacred identity. And here in this silence, something deeper begins to awaken. You realize the money was never the real desire. What you truly sought was freedom, peace, expansion, ease. And as those become your inner state, the outer symbols respond in kind. The bank account shifts. Yes, the physical reflects the spiritual. But more than that, you shift. You become the source, not the seeker, but the sender. You understand now why Neville taught that imagination is the only reality, that nothing comes from without, that all things follow consciousness, not some things, all. And when you rest in the feeling of already having, the universe becomes your servant, not your master. You move through the world differently now, not because your environment has changed, but because your awareness has. The scenery bends to meet your self-concept, and the most extraordinary part is how ordinary it feels. No thunder, no fanfare, just the quiet knowing, it is done. And yet, something whispers still, a deeper layer calls, not for more steps, but for deeper presence, not to manifest another sum, but to awaken the divine rhythm that produces all things without strain. What if you could live here always, not just visit the state of wealth, but dwell in it forever, as natural as breath, as constant as light? What would life look like if you never again left the feeling of already having? And as that question hums beneath the surface, what would life feel like if you never again stepped out of already having? You begin to taste a freedom that words cannot fully hold. Not the freedom that comes after a goal is reached, but the freedom of no longer needing to strive. A freedom that blooms when you realize the end is not a place you reach. It is a state you remain in, to dwell rather than visit, to become so familiar with wealth, not as digits, not as objects, but as identity, that abundance becomes your emotional home, no longer a vacation from lack, but the place you wake up in, the place you return to, the place you never left. And this dwelling becomes sacred, not through effort, not through repetition, but through stillness. You anchor yourself not by doing more, but by being more fully. You touch the inner sanctuary where assumption has become nature. You are no longer trying to believe, you are simply being. This is the secret most overlooked. They chase the outer form without tending the inner fire. They want the fruit without cultivating the root. But you have gone deeper. You have seen the pattern behind appearances. You have touched the source behind the symbol. And now you understand money is not your reward. It is your reflection. It reflects who you are being. It reflects your dwelling state. It reflects your self-concept. When you change your idea of self, everything money touches must rearrange itself accordingly. You do not need to manipulate form. You only need to remain faithful to the feeling, not just in your imagination, but in your daily movements, in how you answer the phone, in how you speak about your future, in how you lie down at night and rise in the morning. You walk as one who has already received. You move through the world as if the thing is done, because in truth it is. And this faith, this quiet certainty, becomes the tuning fork for miracles. The more consistently you return to the tone of I have, the more swiftly the outer world sings in harmony. Even delays, even shadows, become irrelevant. You no longer read conditions for truth. You do not question the absence of evidence. You know that evidence follows the inner movement, not the other way around. And so you smile at delay, not as a warning, but as a fading echo of a state you've already left behind. You live now from the seed, not the soil. And the seed is your assumption, the word made flesh, the pattern of wealth encoded in the silence of your being. It shall not return unto me void. So you no longer revisit the desire. You no longer push the scene. You no longer beg the universe to respond. You assume it has, and then you live from it. You speak from it. You give from it. You rest from it. And slowly, beautifully, the dream of separation fades. The idea that you and your desire were ever apart dissolves. You remember what was always true, that the money you asked for was never outside your being. It was already encoded in your name, your breath, your awareness. You simply had to claim it, not with effort, but with embodiment. And now, as the energy of wealth pulses gently through your state, a new realization stirs beneath it, a knowing so intimate, so profound. It does not speak in words, but in presence. You are not becoming abundant, you are awakening as abundance itself. But what would it mean to walk through every area of life, relationships, health, time itself, with the same effortless knowing? What if this state of financial fulfillment was only the doorway, and beyond it waits the true kingdom? And if this doorway to financial fulfillment is only the beginning, only the shadow cast by a greater light, then what waits beyond must be far more than gold or digits or rising balances. It must be the realization that abundance is not a compartment to be filled, but a nature to be remembered, that the same power which manifests money in days or even moments does not stop with money. It flows endlessly, seeking expression in every corner of your life. You begin to feel it, first as a whisper, then as a current. The way your body responds when you no longer tense at the thought of lack. The way time opens up when you stop racing against it. The way others soften around you, sensing something grounded, whole, untouchable in your energy. You are no longer asking the world to bless you. You are blessing the world by your being. This is what happens when assumption becomes embodiment. Not just in your quiet moments of imagination, but in the ordinary rhythm of your day. Washing dishes, walking through the market, opening a door. Every gesture begins to carry the frequency of already having. And as that frequency stabilizes, so too does your world. The people who owe you pay. The delays dissolve. The ideas arrive. The money finds channels through means you did not invent and could not predict. The more natural the state becomes within, the more unnatural it becomes to lack. Not because of outer proof, but because the inner proof is enough. You no longer rehearse the scene for reassurance. You live inside it. You no longer visit the end. You inhabit it. And in this deep indwelling, the world takes its cue, but you do not cling to outcomes. You no longer need a particular path, a specific method, or the approval of others. You are no longer dependent on what the senses show, because you are the cause, not the echo. You no longer seek signs, because you are the sign. And yet this is not arrogance. This is humility of the highest kind. It is the humility of one who knows that nothing is achieved apart from consciousness, that all wealth is borrowed from the eternal storehouse within, that I and my Father are one, not two, not separate, but one being imagining itself into form. So you continue walking. You let the days pass without fear. You let the hours carry you without rush. The old self would panic, would grasp, would spiral in the face of uncertainty. But you are anchored in the unseen. You are not reacting, you are revealing. And with every quiet assumption, every calm inner word, every moment you return to the feeling of already having, you are writing your world, not in ink or stone, but in state. And the state you persist in will outpicture itself with mathematical certainty. There is no other way. This is why you need not monitor the world. You need only monitor your own self-concept. You do not need to watch your accounts. You watch your thoughts. You do not track the news. You track your inner speech. You do not wait for the call. You assume the call has already come, and then it does. Not always in the form you expect, but always with the signature of your state. For God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, whatever he sows in consciousness, that shall he also reap. This is not punishment. This is precision. And in this perfect law, there is freedom, because now you are sowing in full awareness. You are planting wealth with your attention. You are watering fulfillment with your mood. You are harvesting increase in the silence of your assumption, and the ground of your reality responds with perfect fidelity. But what if your only remaining task is not to gain, not to get, not to prove, but to deepen the stillness where nothing is missing? What if manifestation is not the arrival of a thing, but the unveiling of what was never absent? And if nothing was ever missing, if the thing you seek has always been enfolded within you, then all that remains is to see rightly, to peel back the veil of seeming separation and touch the truth that was never far. What you call delay was never distance. It was simply an invitation to look again, to feel deeper, to remember from where all things flow. You do not manifest by reaching. You manifest by recognizing. And what you recognize, you magnetize, not through force but through identity. The moment you say inwardly, with full sincerity, I have it, the world begins to yield. Not because it has changed its laws, but because you have awakened to them. You have chosen to no longer live as the one who waits. You have taken your seat at the banquet of fulfillment, and you do not rise from the table until it is done. You feast inwardly before the harvest appears. You drink from invisible wells, and the outer, sensing the power of your being, begins to conform. You stop reacting, you start remembering, and what you remember is that the world is not something you must convince. It is something you must assume. The pattern of wealth is not external, it is internal. And the more you imprint it upon the canvas of your mind, the more faithfully it reflects through circumstance. Let it be simple now. No more searching for methods, no more reaching for proof, no more testing the soil before the seed has sprouted. Let this moment be the moment you stop wondering when, and simply allow yourself to be. You are not the one trying to manifest. You are the one for whom manifestation is natural. It is your essence, not your exception. It is not the miracle, it is the law. And the law says clearly, unflinchingly, that what you feel yourself to be, you become. So what do you feel? Not what do you hope, not what do you want, but what do you feel now? Feel rich, and the world must echo it. Feel ease, and doors swing open. Feel gratitude, and more is added unto you. These are not poetic ideas, they are divine principles, written into the very structure of reality. And they do not wait. They respond the instant you claim the end as already done. You are not here to try, you are here to awaken, to lift your inner eyes and see the invisible harvest pressing against the veil. You are here to say inwardly, without resistance or fear, I already am that. And in that saying, the veil thins. And the more you live from this place, not occasionally, not briefly, but continually, the less relevant appearances become. The outer world becomes like a dream you no longer argue with. You no longer ask if it's working. You no longer plead for signs. You know, and in that knowing, the invisible hardens into visibility with grace. Grace because you are no longer doing, you are allowing, and yet this allowing is the most powerful act of all. It is the surrender of the old identity, the dropping of the false self, the quiet death of the one who doubted, and in that sacred surrender, a new you is born, the you who never lacked, never strived, never feared, the you who has always been whole. You begin to see that your desire was never about the money, it was about the awakening. It was the echo that led you home, and now that you have remembered, the form is free to arrive. You no longer need to hold it tightly. You no longer need to watch the clock. You simply abide in the end. You take your place in the mansion prepared before the world began. But what if the greatest manifestation is not the one you imagined, but the peace that arrives when you stop imagining and start being? What if your greatest wealth is the stillness in which all things come effortlessly to you? And if peace is the true inheritance, if stillness is the real treasure, then every imagined desire, every longing dressed in form, is simply a path back to that holy quiet, where nothing is missing and nothing needs to be fixed. What you called a manifestation was never about the money. It was the mirror drawing you toward your own undisturbed essence. You can feel it now, can't you? That subtle shift where yearning falls away and presence takes its place, where the pulse slows, not from fatigue, but from fullness, where nothing on the outside has changed, yet everything within has been made new. This is the wealth few ever seek, not the kind that sits in vaults or flickers on screens, but the kind that cannot be stolen or shaken. It is the wealth of being whole, of knowing you are the cause, the center, the source, the imaginer. And now without effort you notice how the outer begins to bend, not in dramatic surges or frantic flashes, but in gentle alignments. The text comes, the bill clears, the invitation arrives, the conversation turns. The money finds you not because you hunted it, but because you became magnetic through stillness. This is the paradox the world never teaches. The less you try, the more it flows, because trying affirms separation, and separation is the only illusion. You are not drawing wealth from a far-off field. You are letting it rise from within. You are no longer a beggar at the gates. You are the gate itself, and the doors of abundance swing wide the moment you stop guarding them with fear. You have always had access. And now your assumptions no longer waver. Your inner world no longer echoes with doubt. The voice that once asked, what if it doesn't work, has been replaced by the quiet authority of it already has. There is no strain in you now. You breathe in abundance like air. You walk in it, speak from it, sleep in it, not as fantasy, but as fact. You have reached the place where the feeling of wealth is not something you conjure, but something that remains. And as it remains, you realize it was never the sum. It was the state. The dollar amount is secondary. The true shift is who you've become in silence. And from this identity, all forms of wealth respond. Gifts, clients, messages, inheritances, refunds, unseen orchestrations, divine accidents. But you are no longer surprised, because you no longer see these as miracles. You see them as reflections. And you understand what Neville meant when he said, change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live. You are not changing the world directly. You are changing yourself, and the world follows. And now the desire to manifest quickly fades, not because you no longer want, but because you already feel what you thought the thing would give you. Security. ease, freedom. It was never about the number. It was always about the feeling. And that feeling is now your dwelling place. You are no longer on your way. You are already there. And as this becomes natural, the power becomes gentle, the assumption becomes artless, the wealth becomes background, and your life, now rooted in being, begins to unfold with an ease you once thought reserved for the lucky. But this is not luck. This is law, and you have remembered how to use it, not by grasping but by becoming. But what happens when this way of being becomes who you are in every area? What unfolds when you stop compartmentalizing power and begin to see every desire, financial, relational, physical, as equally near, equally now, equally yours? And if peace is the true inheritance, if stillness is the real treasure, then every imagined desire, every longing dressed in form, is simply a path back to that holy quiet, where nothing is missing and nothing needs to be fixed. What you called a manifestation was never about the money. It was the mirror drawing you toward your own undisturbed essence. You can feel it now, can't you? That subtle shift where yearning falls away and presence takes its place, where the pulse slows, not from fatigue, but from fullness, where nothing on the outside has changed, yet everything within has been made new. This is the wealth few ever seek, not the kind that sits in vaults or flickers on screens, but the kind that cannot be stolen or shaken. It is the wealth of being whole, of knowing you are the cause, the center, the source, the imaginer. And now, without effort, you notice how the outer begins to bend, not in dramatic surges or frantic flashes, but in gentle alignments. The text comes, the bill clears, the invitation arrives, the conversation turns, the money finds you not because you hunted it, but because you became magnetic through stillness. This is the paradox the world never teaches. The less you try, the more it flows, because trying affirms separation, and separation is the only illusion. You are not drawing wealth from a far-off field. You are letting it rise from within. You are no longer a beggar at the gates. You are the gate itself, and the doors of abundance swing wide the moment you stop guarding them with fear. You have always had access, and now your assumptions no longer waver. Your inner world no longer echoes with doubt. The voice that once asked, "What if it doesn't work?" has been replaced by the quiet authority of "It already has." There is no strain in you now. You breathe in abundance like air. You walk in it, speak from it, sleep in it, not as fantasy, but as fact. You have reached the place where the feeling of wealth is not something you conjure, but something that remains. And as it remains, you realize it was never the sum, it was the state. The dollar amount is secondary. The true shift is who you've become in silence. And from this identity, all forms of wealth respond. Gifts, clients, messages, inheritances, refunds, unseen orchestrations, divine accidents. But you are no longer surprised, because you no longer see these as miracles. You see them as reflections. And you understand what Neville meant when he said, "Change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live." You are not changing the world directly. You are changing yourself, and the world follows. And now the desire to manifest quickly fades, not because you no longer want, but because you already feel what you thought the thing would give you. Security, ease, freedom. It was never about the number. It was always about the feeling. And that feeling is now your dwelling place. You are no longer on your way. You are already there. And as this becomes natural, the power becomes gentle, the assumption becomes artless, the wealth becomes background, and your life, now rooted in being, begins to unfold with an ease you once thought reserved for the lucky. But this is not luck. This is law, and you have remembered how to use it, not by grasping but by becoming. But what happens when this way of being becomes who you are in every area? What unfolds when you stop compartmentalizing power and begin to see every desire, financial, relational, physical, as equally near, equally now, equally yours? And as that quiet curiosity rises, what other blessings are waiting? You feel the subtle expansion of your awareness, as if the walls of limitation begin to dissolve, and behind them stands a vast garden of fulfilled states you've not yet walked through, not because they were withheld, but because you never assumed they were yours, until now. For if you can accept one thing as done, truly done, then you have touched the pattern, and the pattern is the same in all things. The law does not change for health or love or peace or time, only the image changes, only the assumption varies. The law remains, to him that hath it shall be given. So you begin to see that this is not about money. It never was. It is about becoming fluent in assumption, faithful in feeling, steady in being. It is about the complete and quiet embodiment of already having, already being, already fulfilled. And you now are fluent. You speak in the language of fulfillment, not with words but with vibration, not with effort but with identity. And as this becomes your native tone, you find that life bends with less and less resistance, because resistance was never from the world, it was only from self. You resisted not by choice but by unconscious agreement with lack. But that agreement has been broken, the contract cancelled. You no longer say I will be, you no longer say soon, you say only I am, and everything responds, a stranger's kindness, a forgotten debt erased, a surprising opportunity, a ripple that begins without your hand, but because of your frequency. And you know without needing to explain that this is your doing, not the old you, the worried you, the striving you, the doubting you, but the you that was always present beneath the noise, the you that assumes without asking, that chooses without question, that imagines with authority. This is why you are no longer surprised by the money. It feels familiar, like something you misplaced and found again, and the feeling of it, freedom, lightness, the soft rhythm of ease, is no longer a guest. It has moved in, it breathes through you, and you begin to see the world not as fixed, but as fluid. Every interaction, every moment, every reflection carries your tone. The outer becomes like clay, molded by your inner mood, and so your practice becomes less about changing things and more about staying loyal to your state, not just visiting the state of wealth when it's quiet or convenient, but abiding in it as your truest nature, allowing it to color your thoughts, your posture, your breath, letting it be the background hum beneath every word you speak. And the result is not frantic gain, it is calm inevitability. You stop wondering when, you stop needing signs, you rest in what is done, and the done begins to appear, not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily, like light returning to a darkened room. But something more sacred begins to dawn beneath it all, a still truth that asks nothing, yet answers everything. If all things are already mine in consciousness, then what do I truly want? Not what the world says you should want, not what you once reached for from fear, but what your being longs to express, now that it knows it can simply assume and receive. What dream remains once lack is no longer in the equation. What beauty could unfold when you no longer create from desire, but from wholeness? And as that deeper question blooms, what would I create from wholeness, not from hunger? The atmosphere of your inner world softens again. It becomes not a place of striving, but of sanctuary. You realize you are no longer manifesting to fix something broken. You are expressing something eternal. Creation becomes play, imagination becomes worship, and the desire itself begins to feel sacred. This is where the law becomes love. You are not trying to bend the world. You are revealing what was always within you, no longer using the power of assumption to get, but to give expression to the divine pattern you carry in seed form. Money still flows, but now it flows through the hands of one who remembers that the true wealth is awareness, and you feel it now, more deeply than ever before, that each assumption is not just a thought, but a conception, that every time you dwell in the feeling of already having, you plant something real, something living, and though the form may not yet be visible, the seed is already bearing fruit in the invisible. You are not waiting, you are gestating, and this waiting is not passive, it is holy. It is the pregnant pause of the soul that knows the birth is certain. You move through the world, not with urgency, but with reverence. You speak from fullness, not from emptiness. You radiate the kind of calm that only comes from seeing the end and calling it now. You have become the operant power, and the more naturally this truth lives in you, the more effortlessly your world arranges itself. You no longer try to force conditions. You simply align your state, and the state does the work. It draws the event. It orchestrates the unfolding. It compels the scene. This is why Jesus could say, "When ye pray, believe that ye receive, and ye shall receive." The moment of receiving is not in the outer, it is in the assumption. And once received in consciousness, the form becomes inevitable. You do not plead with the unseen, you partner with it. You walk hand in hand with your own imagination, and you treat it as sacred. You no longer dismiss it as fantasy. You know now, it is the first cause, and all else is downstream. So now, even when doubt whispers, even when the senses flash their illusions, you smile softly and return to your center, not to redo the scene, not to fix, but simply to rest again in who you already are, the wealthy one, the provided for one, the one whose needs are met before they arise. This is not fiction, this is not repetition, this is law, and law obeys you when you embody its truth. You carry yourself differently now, not for performance, not to convince, but because something within you has shifted, a foundation has been laid, and the identity you once imagined has become your nature. You no longer try to live in the end, you simply dwell there, and the world reflects not your effort, but your being. The emails come, the refund appears, the meeting turns, and it all feels so easy, because it is no longer tied to worthiness, to effort, or to timing. It is tied only to your assumption. You assume, you feel, you allow, and then you receive, not as a beggar, but as a giver in disguise. But even now, with all things flowing, something richer emerges from within, not more, not better, but truer, a vision beyond the form, a question that holds no urgency, only wonder. If my imagination is God, and all things yield to its movement, then what becomes possible when I create not just for myself, but as my highest self? And if your imagination is not only the source of all creation, but the very face of God within you, then the way you create begins to change. No longer as a person grasping upward, but as a divine being remembering downward, pulling the eternal into time, not for gain but for glory, not for approval but for expression. The same power that manifested dollars now reveals itself as the architect of beauty, purpose, and peace. You begin to feel it, quietly at first, like a shift in the wind. The desires you once chased now circle back to you, not as things to attain, but as symbols to radiate. You see clearly, I never needed to chase money. I only needed to become the version of myself who no longer questioned its place. That version of you already existed. It still does. And as you return to it, through feeling, through assumption, through the soft claiming of already having, you awaken not just wealth, but wisdom, not just cash, but clarity. And something stirs even deeper now. What would I build if I no longer feared lack? What would I create, not to survive, but to serve? This is where divine remembrance begins. You no longer use the law merely to rearrange your life. You begin to embody the law as a way of being. Each thought becomes sacred, each inner word a seed, and your world, once a thing to be fixed, becomes a canvas for the highest expression of yourself. You imagine now not from emptiness, but from abundance. You sit in the silence and let the scenes unfold, not because you need them, but because you are free enough to choose them. You no longer use imagination to fill a gap. You use it to reveal the fullness already within, and you discover something miraculous. The more you assume the state of already having, the less tightly you hold the form. You no longer need it to appear to believe. You no longer monitor the clock. Your peace becomes unconditional. And because your peace is no longer dependent, your manifestations arrive more quickly, more naturally, more playfully. This is the divine rhythm. Assume, feel, release. You no longer chase outcomes. You enter states, and states attract their own. You no longer question if the money will come. You assume yourself as the one who always receives. You become wealth, not in theory, but in tone, and tone changes everything. This is how life rearranges, not by willpower, but by resonance. You attract as you are, and you are what you assume. So you move now with new purpose, not because you must, but because you may. You have become the one who receives without resistance, gives without depletion, and lives without fear. It is written, all that the Father hath is mine. You begin to understand this not as metaphor, but as memory. You do not ask for permission to prosper. You do not wait for proof. You stand in the awareness that everything you once reached for is already yours in consciousness, and therefore must be yours in form. But the question remains, not with pressure, but with peace. If you could imagine anything now, not for need, but for joy, what would it be? If you could live in a state of effortless provision, what beauty would you call into being? What vision would you hold, not to survive the world, but to shape it with your light? And if you truly allowed yourself to imagine without limits, not to escape the world, but to bless it, what vision would arise from within? What would unfold if you no longer imagined from fear, but from fullness? What might you choose, knowing that the substance of every form is already resting in your spirit, awaiting only your assumption? You begin to feel the depth of that question, not as a challenge but as a holy invitation. This is no longer about money. This is about creative dominion. This is about becoming the image and likeness of your imagination, no longer separate from what you forth. The moment you assume the state, not wish for it, not try to hold it, but become it, creation begins its quiet movement. You are no longer knocking on the door. You are the one who holds the key, and the key was never effort. It was identity. It was being. You no longer chase the outer, because you understand the outer is not the cause. It is the shadow cast by your inner acceptance. You stop playing the old game of cause and effect. You rise into the truth that consciousness alone is causation, that what you are within must become what you hold without. And now, without effort, you begin to see it unfold, not dramatically, not loudly, but with precision, exactness, elegance, a message from someone you hadn't thought of in years, an unexpected refund, a delay suddenly reversed, a business idea reawakened, a client saying yes with no persuasion. The channels open as soon as you stop trying to pry them open. You no longer try, you assume, and you assume not with tension, but with quiet joy. The joy that rises when you know, even if no one else sees it yet. The joy of the pregnant moment. The moment where the seed has already been sown, and the harvest is no longer a question, but a certainty. And still you return to the stillness, not to do more, not to change what is already working, but to remain, to abide in the state until it becomes your home, to live so deeply in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, that you forget what it felt like to lack, you forget what it meant to strive, you forget the old self who measured worth by outcomes, who feared the silence between efforts. You forget that you once believed wealth was earned in time, rather than accepted in stillness, and this forgetting is sacred. You are shedding an identity that was never truly yours. You are stepping into the garment of your divine inheritance, not with force, but with surrender, not with control, but with consciousness. It is no longer about seeing results, it is about seeing rightly. The one who sees rightly knows that every dollar, every detail, every unfolding, is just an echo of their state. The money is never the miracle. The miracle is the self who knows it is already done. So you walk now with that knowing. You breathe with it, move with it, sleep inside it, not as something to maintain, but something you are. And as this becomes your rhythm, you find that time bends, the 3 days stretch and contract. The timeline obeys your assumption. It must. For the law knows no delay except the delay of doubt, and you have let doubt fall away like an old robe. You wear conviction now, not loud, not brash, soft, steady, alive, and yet something even gentler begins to whisper beneath it all, a voice not of urgency, but of reverence. It asks, not from lack, but from light. If you are already the operant power, then how gently can you command the infinite? How quietly can you create a life that sings without sound, that pours without noise, that gives without being asked? And if creation could be that gentle, if the infinite responded not to volume, but to the purity of your inner stillness, then you begin to see why the most powerful acts are the quietest ones. The world was never changed by striving. It was always changed by state. And the most magnetic state of all is ease. Not laziness, but spiritual certainty. Ease is not passivity. It is authority without aggression. It is knowing without proving. It is the invisible crown that rests on the brow of one who has remembered who they are. And you wear that crown now, not as pride, but as permission. You no longer dim your light to feel humble. You no longer shrink yourself to seem deserving. You do not justify. You do not explain. You simply know. And that knowing becomes the container through which all things are added unto you. You no longer try to hold the vision. The vision holds you. It breathes through you, moves your words, calms your heartbeat. You walk in a softness the world can't name. People feel it before they understand it. They are drawn to you, not for what you say, but for what you radiate. This is the power of embodiment. You are no longer visualizing as a tool. You are living as a testimony. The evidence is not what happens outside. The evidence is the peace within. And that peace is no longer conditional. It is not waiting for the 3 days to pass. It is not counting the hours. It is already received. And in this receiving, you realize something beautiful. You are not asking the universe for a favor. You are not earning your desires through effort or worthiness. You are giving consciousness its rightful shape. You are honoring the law by stepping into the form your spirit already occupies. You are not becoming, you are revealing. And the money, the thousands, the windfalls, the gifts, they show up not to fulfill you, but to match you. The echo of your assumption becomes visible, tangible, touchable. Not because you needed it, because you knew it. You no longer fear fluctuation. You no longer wonder if the state will hold. You've stopped thinking of it as a state at all. It is now your resting place. It is the way you see, the way you breathe. It is who you are, when you are no longer pretending to be small. This is what it means to dwell in the end. Not to visit it with hope, but to remain in it with calm expectancy. No strain, no proving, just being. And the fruits begin to multiply. Not because you watered harder, but because you stopped digging up the seed. You trusted the unseen, and the unseen honored you. For the seed does not grow because it is watched. It grows because it was believed in. And so with every hour that passes, you feel less urgency and more peace. You stop looking for evidence, and begin moving as if it's already there. You wake in the morning with thanks, not because something happened, but because you know it has. You give not out of fear of not having enough, but out of overflow. You move not out of necessity, but inspiration. And in this divine rhythm, time becomes your servant. Days bend, paths appear, circumstances comply. But even in this beauty, the most sacred question remains, not as doubt, but as invitation. If assumption is the birthplace of worlds, what masterpiece are you quietly ready to remember into form next? And as that question lingers in the quiet, what masterpiece am I now ready to remember into form? A soft knowing begins to unfold beneath it. Not the kind that rushes to answer, but the kind that rests in the beauty of possibility. You realize there's no urgency anymore, because the true artist does not rush the canvas. The painter of worlds moves in rhythm, not in panic. You have become that artist, and wealth is no longer the goal. It is the brush. It is not what you seek, but what you express through. The sum you once reached for has become the color, the tool, the texture of your unfolding creation. And you realize you were never after the money. You were after the freedom to create as the divine being you've always been. That freedom is yours now, and with it comes a gentler boldness, a softer confidence, not loud, not proud, but sure. You begin to notice you don't ask for things in the same way anymore. You decide, and in that decision, so simple, so quiet, the law begins its movement. You don't wait to be shown a sign. You are the sign. Every desire begins with the same sacred act, the assumption that it already is. You no longer measure your vision by past outcomes. You no longer shrink your imagination to fit what others call possible. You have touched the truth. Reality is not a wall. It is a mirror, and the mirror is loyal to your image. You need not repeat the affirmation if it has become your tone. You need not visualize the scene again if it has become your dwelling place. You live now from the end, and the end is peace. And so the 3 days, those sacred cycles of unfolding, become not a deadline, but a rhythm, a promise that once you plant the seed of identity, the harvest must follow. You are no longer waiting for the clock to complete your miracle. You are watching your state complete itself through divine timing, not late, not early, exact. And this is why you feel no more pressure, no more strain. The money is not arriving, it has arrived in consciousness. And because consciousness is the only reality, the rest must follow. It is written, He calleth those things which be not as though they were, and in calling them so they become. You understand now that calling is not shouting into the world, it is assuming within. And when you assume something so fully, it becomes your emotional baseline. You don't need to check if it's working. You don't need to ask if it's real. You simply breathe, and the world follows. So now you let life unfold without interruption. You don't second-guess the delay. You don't monitor the bank app. You walk like one who has already received. And in that walking you witness the sacred orchestration of the law. A message from someone you hadn't spoken to in months. A refund you didn't expect. A yes where there was once no. You didn't cause it. You remembered it. And the longer you live in remembrance, the more impossible it becomes to return to striving. You've tasted the fruit of assumption. You've seen the law made flesh. You've felt the quiet thrill of receiving without reaching. And yet, something deeper still invites you. Not louder, not more, just deeper. If all things respond to your inner self-concept, who would you be if you let every remaining shadow of doubt dissolve now? If you allowed even your subtlest fears of not having, not being, not deserving, to fall like mist in the morning sun? And if even the faintest trace of doubt were allowed to dissolve? If every whisper of not yet, every shadow of not enough were to be surrendered without resistance? What silence would remain? What stillness might emerge from beneath that final layer of disbelief? You begin to feel it now, soft and vast like the space between stars. A sacred quiet that no longer negotiates with appearances. A peace that asks for nothing and yet possesses everything. You no longer need the world to prove your power. You feel it humming in your breath, threaded through your awareness, woven into the very shape of your being. This is the state beyond effort. And from here you no longer use imagination to acquire. You use it to express. There is nothing to chase, because there is no lack. There is only the unfolding of what you already are in higher and higher degrees of clarity. You sit with the feeling of money already received, not to trick the mind, but because the soul remembers. The scene is no longer something you construct. It is something you return to, like a long-forgotten room in your inner house, now opened again to light. And in that light, even the need for confirmation begins to fade. You do not ask for signs. You become the signal. You no longer refresh the inbox. You no longer count the hours. You know deeply, fully, silently, that it is done, that your assumption once accepted has been planted, and that the ground of consciousness always bears fruit in season. Your only work now is to remain faithful, not to effort, but to feeling. You remain loyal to the emotional tone of wealth, not as fantasy, but as fact. And in this loyalty the world responds, not with delay, but with orchestration. Circumstances shuffle, people move, decisions turn, a bridge of incidents unfolds that could never have been planned with logic. But it feels natural, because it matches your state. This is why things begin to flow so quickly, when you stop needing them to. The state of desire is the state of postponement. The state of fulfillment is the state of release. And release is magnetic. You become like the magnet, not the seeker. And money flows toward you as surely as rivers to the sea. Not because you forced it, but because you remembered who you are. And you no longer feel the need to impress this knowing on others. You speak less, but your presence carries weight. You take fewer steps, but they leave deeper prints. You ask for less, but receive more. Because everything you assumed inwardly has taken root. And what is rooted cannot be undone. It is written, let the weak say, I am strong. Not as a wish, but as a command to the self. And in that saying, the transformation begins. You no longer describe what the world shows you. You declare what consciousness reveals. You no longer mirror the world. You lead it. And so your world shifts again. Not violently, not suddenly, but inevitably. The moment you stopped waiting, the moment you claimed the end, everything else became an echo. And yet in the quiet after the echo, another layer opens. Not for more speed, not for bigger sums, but for deeper surrender. What happens when even your desires become offerings? When you imagine not just to gain, but to give your inner world shape and share it with the outer. What wealth could you hold then? Not as possession, but as presence. And as the idea settles, that your desire itself may be an offering, you begin to sense an even deeper rhythm, one that has always moved beneath your longing. What if you were never here to take from life, but to give it shape through your own remembrance of wholeness? What if your desire for wealth was never a reaching, but a calling, an invitation to reveal more of who you already are? You are not imagining for gain. You are imagining to unveil the divine. And suddenly, even money becomes holy. Not because of its power in the world, but because of the power it reflects when it flows from alignment. When money is not grasped at, but received with reverence. When it is not used to fix something broken, but to express something beautiful. This is how the operant power creates. Not to survive, but to serve the highest self-expression. Not to fill a void, but to overflow. You do not imagine to escape lack. You imagine because your nature is generative, creative, boundless. You were never meant to be the effect of the world. You are the cause walking in flesh. And you feel this now, not as concept, but as presence. The moment you release the last thread of neediness, something else emerges, lightness. The very act of imagining becomes joyful again, effortless. You don't sit down to create from pressure. You open the inner door as naturally as breath, as gently as blinking. You no longer count days. You live from the truth that time has already obeyed you, that what you accepted in feeling was already complete in the unseen, and the form is now simply catching up. Time no longer intimidates you. It has become your witness, and in this ease, the desire you once saw as urgent now feels quiet, whole, like a flower already in bloom, waiting only for your eyes to open and see it. The 3 days do not belong to the world. They belong to you. They are not a countdown. They are a rhythm, a breath, the sacred interval between conception and appearance, between feeling and form. And your role is not to rush it, but to remain in the end, to dwell in the feeling so faithfully that no part of you questions it anymore. And if a doubt arises, you bless it. You don't fight it. You don't resist it. You recognize it as the old self's voice fading into silence, and you return, not with effort, but with grace. You return to the scene, to the tone, to the truth. You feel the money in your hand, not as a fantasy, but as fulfillment. You hear the words of confirmation. You see the numbers, the message, the signature. You smile, not because it is coming, but because you know it's done, and the world softens beneath your knowing. This is how the law works. It does not respond to pleading, it responds to embodiment, and you have become the embodiment of abundance, not temporarily, not as an experiment, but as a way of being, and in that being, you now ask from a higher place, what else might I create, not to possess, but to reflect the infinite nature of the one imagining? What new form of wealth could I assume, simply because it feels like the next chapter in this divine story? And as that invitation rises from within, what new form of wealth might I now express, simply because I can? You feel the entire landscape of desire begin to transform. It is no longer shaped by lack, it is sculpted by freedom. The freedom to choose not because you must, but because you are made in the image of the Creator, and creation is your native language. Desire is no longer a reaching, it is a rhythm, a quiet knowing that what you feel as true must take shape, because consciousness never lies. You imagine, not to make something happen, but because imagining is your original power. You assume the state, not because you're missing something, but because it delights you to live from the fullness of it, and that delight becomes a magnetic field. Money responds, yes, but more than that, time slows to serve you. People feel something different in your presence. They lean in, they listen, they offer without knowing why. The seen world adjusts itself around the tone you carry, not because you ask it to, but because you assumed it already had. This is why the most profound manifestations often come when you've forgotten to watch for them. You drop the desire into the stillness of assumption. You feel the wish as already fulfilled, and then you go about your day as if nothing is missing, because in truth, nothing is. And while you rest in the end, the form moves quietly toward you, called not by effort, but by the gravity of your being. You have become the center, and in this center, every detail begins to turn in your favor, not as coincidence, but as consequence. The moment you inhabit the state of wealth, the bridge to wealth must rise to meet your feet, and it will come clothed in the ordinary, an offer, a refund, a yes, a turn of timing so subtle, it would be missed by the unawakened. But you see it clearly now. The world is not moving at random. It is moving in rhythm with you. It is echoing your most dominant assumption. And the 3 days are not something you measure. They are something you activate. You activate them by stepping into the completed scene and refusing to return to the old. You do not look back. You do not ask again. You do not entertain the question, is it working? Because that question belongs to the version of you who didn't yet understand. But you understand now. You've crossed the threshold. You don't need more signs. You are the sign, and so you treat every moment from this place of completion. You spend money as one who always has. You speak as one who never fears. You rest as one who knows that reality has already been instructed and must obey. And when the mind wanders, you gently bring it home, not to struggle, but to rest again in the vision fulfilled. For it is written, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, and your thee is the fulfilled state. The wealth already done, the sum already received, the life already lived from the end. And from this peace, a sacred curiosity begins to emerge. Not how will it come, but what else am I ready to claim, simply because I know who I am. Not what do I lack, but what new dimension of self may now be revealed through this flow of abundance. And as that new curiosity breathes through you, what else may be revealed through this abundance flowing to me? You begin to sense that manifestation was never the end, only the beginning, a quiet beginning, a sacred invitation to explore what happens when you stop surviving and begin creating from love, from clarity, from freedom. You no longer want wealth to rescue you. You desire it now to reveal more of the divine through you, because you've seen it clearly. Money is not the supply, you are. You are the fountain from which form flows. And when you assume the state of having, you do not pull wealth from the world. You awaken it through your own alignment. And now you understand the simplicity that was always hidden behind complexity. It never mattered how many affirmations you spoke, how many hours you meditated, how well you visualized the details. What mattered, what always mattered, was how fully you assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, how completely you identified with the version of yourself who had already received. That version of you exists now. And every time you return to the state of already having, each time you close your eyes and breathe as the one for whom it is done, you collapse the gap. Not the outer gap of days or dollars, but the inner gap between self and source, between who you believed you were and who you truly are. The bridge was never made of effort. It was made of being, and now you walk that bridge not with effort, but with reverence. The assumption has become so natural, so settled, that even when the world appears unchanged, your state is unshaken. You do not ask if it will come, you simply say, of course it has. And the moment you say it inwardly with conviction, you see the first ripple, a message you didn't expect, a refund long forgotten, a gift, a call, a coincidence that carries the unmistakable fragrance of fulfillment. It is the universe mirroring your state, proving not itself, but your own consistency, because nothing resists your assumption, except your return to the old. But you don't return anymore. You don't look over your shoulder for signs. You don't search for the form to give you permission to feel. You've made feeling your foundation, and that feeling is unmovable. Now you live as one who is no longer asking life to deliver. You are delivering yourself to life, as the one who already has. You let the moment pass without checking. You let the desire unfold without pushing. You let the mystery of how remain sacred, because you trust the law is perfect, and it is. It was never late. It was only waiting for you to dwell without contradiction, to become so steady in your inner world that the outer could no longer delay its reflection. So what flows to you now comes quickly, not because you are doing more, but because you are contradicting less. You are not blocking the flow with disbelief. You are no longer shaking the seed to see if it has sprouted. You are letting the fruit ripen in stillness, and you begin to feel wealth not just in your account, but in your heart, in your thoughts, in the way you speak about your future, in the way you no longer worry about when or how. This is true abundance, freedom from needing to see it, because you already are it. And from this fullness, something even more beautiful begins to rise, not louder, but deeper. If you no longer need to get, what are you now free to give? What vision could you now hold? Not for rescue, but for remembrance. What would your imagination reveal if it no longer worked for your survival, but for your soul? And as you dwell in that question, not from seeking, but from serenity, what might imagination reveal if it served not my survival, but my soul? You feel a quiet pulse beneath your awareness, like a deeper current long ignored. You have touched wealth. You have felt the reality of receiving. But now, something even more profound begins to bloom. The desire to create from truth rather than tension. For when the need to get dissolves, the space to give expands. And giving in this sense is not the giving of effort or labor or even material. It is the giving of vision, the offering of consciousness to itself. It is imagining not to possess, but to reflect, not to fill a void, but to unveil the fullness that was always there. You begin to see that all creation was always self-revelation. Every assumption made flesh is a part of you remembered. Each desire fulfilled is not a goal reached, but an identity reclaimed. You are not creating from lack. You are letting form mirror the wholeness you've chosen to embody. And so you imagine now, not for proof, but for joy. You envision the check arriving, the amount, specific and strange enough that you know it could not be coincidence. You see your name printed. You feel the texture of the paper. You hear your voice saying, of course it came, it had to. And in that hearing, something shifts, not in the world, but in your being. The scene becomes less like fiction and more like memory. You're not hoping, you're remembering. And remembrance is the secret door through which all manifestation enters. You remember the law, you remember the feeling, you remember the version of yourself who already lives in the having. And when you move as that version, the outer world must comply, not because you forced it, but because you have made it inevitable. You walk through your home differently now. You hold your posture, like one who is always supported, You glance at your phone, expecting good news, not as wish, but as rhythm. You spend from a place of flow, not fear, and every dollar feels like a wave, returning to the ocean it came from. This is the essence of divine circulation. You are no longer trying to stop the river. You are letting it pass through you with ease. You receive not to hoard, but to extend. You give not to prove, but to affirm. The money is no longer the reward, it is the reflection. And you understand now that reflection can only echo what you've already claimed within. And so you no longer concern yourself with the details. You don't ask when. You don't wonder how. You rest in the feeling that it's done, and the rest arranges itself around that tone. Because tone is always stronger than time. Vibration is always louder than logic. This is why your inner world is sacred ground, not a place to visit occasionally, but the temple in which all things are formed. When you sit there in quiet authority, and say inwardly, I am the one who has, the law of your being responds. It bends circumstances, moves people, shifts timing, not to please you, but to obey you. Because consciousness is the only reality, and your assumption is law. It is written, be still, and know that I am God, not by force, not by asking, not by waiting, but by stillness. And in stillness, all things move. In stillness, all things rise. In stillness, the wealth you desire becomes the wealth you are. And just beyond that stillness, a new question gently forms. If I no longer seek to attract, and instead become, then what else might I choose to become, simply because it delights my soul to do so? What state might I live from next, not for validation, but for the beauty of revealing even more of the divine through me? And if becoming is no longer about proving, and having is no longer about earning, what would you choose next? Simply because it feels like truth to you. Not for validation, not for applause, but for the sheer joy of knowing yourself more completely through what you bring into form. You begin to feel the gentle expansion of that question, not a pressure, but a breath. You are not manifesting to get out of anything anymore. You are manifesting to reflect the light already within you. The wealth, the freedom, the luxury, they are no longer the destination. They are the echo of your internal shift. You imagine now from fullness, not from hunger. You no longer sit in meditation to fix your life. You return to the inner world to remember it as finished. You are not correcting anything. You are confirming what already is. The scene may be new, but the feeling is familiar, because the feeling of already having is the secret signature of all answered prayers. You've worn that feeling before, in quiet moments where the mind was still, and the heart whispered, this is already mine. You didn't need to say it aloud. You didn't need to script the moment. You just knew, and that knowing began the movement. Because assumption is the womb of manifestation. You are not waiting for the world to change. You are not waiting for the world to change. You are not waiting for circumstances to catch up. You are living from the end with such simplicity, such quiet conviction, that the form has no choice but to rise. And still, you do not rush. You don't lean forward in impatience. You lean back into faith. You recline in the knowing that all things are responding to your state, and your state is already settled. This is the stillness that carries the power of mountains. It does not move the world by storm. It moves the world by being unmoved. You are no longer at the mercy of appearances. You could see the opposite of your desire and still rest in peace, because you know that outer evidence is only the echo of a former state. It is not prophecy. It is not the final word. It is only the mirror, and you are the source it reflects. So you return, again and again, not with strain, but with stillness, to the scene that feels real, to the number that appears before your eyes, to the feeling of your hand closing around it, to the softness of breath that follows, to the release, to the thank you that rises not as a practice, but as a natural response to what is already done. You are not reaching forward. You are remembering backward. You are not building the bridge. You are walking one already formed the moment you assume the end. And each step you take in faith reveals another stone, another path, another unfolding. You are not inventing your wealth. You are arriving at it. And as you live this way, something unexpected begins to bloom. Peace becomes your atmosphere. Generosity becomes your nature. You give easily, not because you are trying to attract more, but because you already feel full. You bless others not to be blessed, but because your inner cup runs over. And this is where true manifestation becomes something greater than personal gain. It becomes a way of showing others who they are, a way of reflecting the divine back into a world that has forgotten it lives within. You are no longer just creating money. You are creating from identity, from love, from the God seed within you. And in this awareness, even deeper visions begin to stir. Visions not of what you can acquire, but of what you can awaken. If this is the power you've used to bring wealth into form in days, what healing could you assume now? What peace could you embody? What impossible door could you watch open just because you finally stopped asking and fully became? And if the same power that brought forth money with ease could now be directed toward the unseen spaces of your life, toward healing, toward peace, toward transformation you once thought would take years, what else might unfold within 3 days, or even less? Once you no longer resisted the truth. You feel the question arise not from ambition, but from stillness, not from effort, but from expansion. Because once you've tasted what it means to assume a thing and see it become flesh, something deep within you begins to stir. Not more hunger, but more permission. Not a desire to chase, but a willingness to accept, to live in even greater states of wholeness, simply because it is your nature to do so. You begin to understand the law doesn't just work for money. It works for everything. It is not selective. It is not moral. It does not favor large over small, difficult over easy. To the law, all things are equal. Whether you imagine $100 or 100,000, the only difference is your belief in how quickly you are allowed to receive. And now you allow quickly. You let the scene come to life before your inner eye, and you do not interrupt it with doubt. You let the feeling rise, and you do not silence it with analysis. You feel yourself inside the answered prayer, and you do not escape it with logic. You remain, and it is this remaining, this staying in the end, this dwelling in the having, that speeds everything. You are not here to rush. You are here to reveal. You are not manipulating matter. You are aligning with the truth, that matter must reflect consciousness. This is the sacred order. First the inner man, then the outer manifestation. And so now when the money comes, and it does, you no longer feel surprise. You no longer speak of miracles as if they were accidents. You do not say, I can't believe it. You say, of course, because this is not luck. This is law. You assumed it. And so it became. You dwell in that vibration now, quietly, steadily, like a tree that no longer needs to prove its roots. You stand in the felt, knowing of completion. You no longer water with worry. You no longer tend with fear. You rest in what you've sown, and the fruits come, in 3 days, in less. Sometimes before the assumption has even cooled in your mind, the outer moves, because time is no longer your God. Imagination is, the Alpha and the Omega, the first cause, the living God clothed in the human soul, and still, deeper waters stir. If this is possible with money, if vast unimaginable sums bend to your assumption, what might shift if you applied the same principle to identity, to purpose, to forgiveness? What if you stopped imagining what you want to get, and began imagining who you are here to become? What would unfold then? What form would grace take if it wore your name, your face, your breath? You've remembered the law, but what happens now if you let the law lead you, not just into wealth, but into your highest self? Not because you must, but because you finally know. Nothing is denied to the one who assumes it is already theirs. And if nothing is truly denied, if the only barrier was the belief that you were separate from the source, then all delay dissolves the moment you drop the false self, the self that waits, the self that doubts, the self that measures time instead of embodying eternity. Because in the moment you assume from your divine center, the form must move, not later, not eventually, but now. You begin to understand what you always sensed, that the real waiting was never outside you. It was in your hesitation to receive. Not because you were unworthy, but because you forgot you were already whole. And now, remembering the truth, you stand without effort in the end, not visiting it like a tourist, but dwelling there like a native. You are not hoping the money will come. You are living as the one who already received. You feel the ease in your body. You feel the lightness in your breath. You speak with the calm of one who knows how the story ends, and the story ends in fulfillment. This is why the money comes easily now, not because of outer changes, but because of inner stability. You are no longer shaken by appearances. You don't flinch when the bank balance looks unchanged. You don't spiral when others doubt. You don't shrink when the world offers contradiction, because you have chosen the final scene. And everything in creation is now rearranging itself to reflect your choice. You are not reacting. You are revealing. You are not making things happen. You are remembering what is already yours in the unseen and letting the scene catch up. This is the true secret of rapid manifestation. Not force, but fidelity. Not pressure, but persistence in the end. You assume the tone of completion and let it ring through every word, every glance, every step. You don't perform the role. You become the character, and the stage shifts accordingly. And the more you live from this space, the more naturally life opens. Money shows up without tension. Opportunities come without effort. People respond without explanation. You become the center of gravity, not because of what you do, but because of who you have allowed yourself to be. And now, you are no longer tempted to rush. You let the 3 days pass without panic, because you know 3 days is not a clock, it's a code, a symbol of resurrection, the time it takes for an old state to die, and the new to rise. You are not counting hours anymore. You are trusting the rhythm of the law, and the law does not fail. You've stopped seeking shortcuts, because you've stepped into the only truth that matters. Consciousness is the only reality. And from that consciousness, you imagine what is lovely, what is noble, what is already done. You plant the scene like a seed, and walk away, not to forget it, but to trust it. And in that trust, the form begins to harden into fact. So when the message comes, when the payment clears, when the number appears in your hand or on your screen, you smile, not because you are shocked, but because you remember. This is how it always works. This is how it must work. For the outer is not creating the inner. The outer is obeying it. And the more you rest in this, the more powerful you become. Because true power never rushes. It does not explain itself. It simply is. And you have become that still power, that sacred current, that quiet confidence that calls things that are not as though they were, and watches them appear, exactly on time. But what if you didn't stop here? What if you continued, not to manifest more, but to deepen your remembrance? What if this money, these results, this ease, were only the first fruits of a much greater knowing, a doorway into a life that is not only abundant in form, but rich in presence? And what if that doorway was already open? If the money you imagined into form was only the veil, parting to reveal something far more luminous? Not just external riches, but the richness of being itself. Not just transactions fulfilled, but the transformation of how you exist, moment to moment, breath by breath, no longer waiting to become, but living as one who already is. You begin to feel that shift, not as something to do, but something to allow. It's quieter than desire, softer than excitement. It is the still unfolding of your own divine identity, taking root deeper with each assumption you no longer second guess. With every moment you rest in the end, you are crowned in a new way of seeing, effortless, expansive, eternal. This is what the world never taught you about money, that it was never the point. It was only ever the mirror, shaped by your self-concept, polished by your faith, animated by the spirit that moves unseen through every form. You are not here to chase reflections. You are here to realize the light behind them. And in that realization, something releases. The tension drops. The old habits no longer tempt you. You stop wondering whether it's working, because you've become someone for whom it always works. And that new identity, the one who assumes and receives without doubt, is no longer a costume. It's your native clothing. You do not perform abundance. You are abundance. You do not rehearse the feeling of wealth. You remember it. And the more you remember, the more the 3 days bend to your knowing. Sometimes it happens before you even finish the scene, sometimes before your sentence ends. Because now, you are not waiting for time to deliver. You are living in the timeless place, where all things are already done. You look around and see evidence not with surprise, but with gratitude. Not, can you believe this? But yes, of course, because you're not living by the logic of delay anymore. You are living by the rhythm of assumption. You are walking in what is written, according to your faith, be it unto you. And that faith is not a wish, it is a feeling of having already received. And you have received, over and over again. The money has arrived, the unexpected windfall, the sudden opportunity, the answer without effort. And with every fulfilled assumption, your inner landscape grows more serene, more sure. more unshakable. And now, the desire for more does not rise from lack, it rises from vision, from the sacred joy of creating something beautiful, not to fill a gap, but to express the fullness that now overflows within. You are no longer reacting to life, you are composing it. Every thought becomes a note, every feeling a chord, every assumption a melody that must echo back in form. And because you've seen the law in motion, you trust it now with more than just money. You trust it with everything. And the question begins to change. Not how can I manifest this amount in 3 days, but what kind of world would I build if I walked every hour as the one for whom nothing is denied. That is the true threshold, the edge where personal desire melts into divine remembrance, where wealth becomes less about accumulation and more about embodiment, not about holding more, but being more, radiating more, giving more, not from depletion, but from the endless wellspring of your own fulfilled identity. And if that's true, if you are already that wellspring, then what beauty are you ready to let flow next? What would it feel like to live not just in abundance, but as abundance, in every thought, every word, every breath? And what if living as abundance is simpler than you ever allowed it to be? What if it doesn't come with effort, but with surrender? Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of pretending you are anything less than divine. You begin to feel it now, not just as a thought, but as a tone, an atmosphere, a shift in the space behind your eyes. The identity of the seeker falls away, and the identity of the source begins to shine. You stop chasing outcomes and begin to generate them. Not with force, not with repetition, but with quiet, unwavering presence. Because you've seen it, haven't you? The moment you stop reaching, things arrive. The moment you stop questioning, things settle. The moment you say yes to the end, as already here, the bridge begins to form, quietly, invisibly, but always faithfully. You now move through the world, not as one who is becoming, but as one who already is. And because you move from that place, the forms must rearrange, the people must respond, the emails must arrive, the accounts must rise, the opportunity must reveal itself. Not to give you permission to feel it, but because you already felt it first. This is how you bend time. You don't shorten the hours. You step into the only moment that's ever real, now. You make now your end, now your fulfillment, now your throne. And from that still seat of assumption, the world bows, not because you demanded it, but because you became it. It is finished. And so your words carry more silence. Your steps carry more stillness. You don't tell the story of waiting anymore. You don't narrate the middle. You speak from the end, as if it were the only truth, because it is. This is why your results accelerate. Not because you push harder, but because you resist less. You no longer return to the old state, just because the senses haven't caught up. You no longer believe that delay means denial. You've lived this enough times to know the longer you remain in the end, the shorter the path becomes. And this knowing, this trust, is the real currency. Not the number in your account, not the cash in your hand, but the feeling in your chest when you say, it's done, and every cell agrees. This is when money moves toward you, like a tide returning to its source. This is when 3 days becomes 3 hours. This is when you receive not from trying, but from being. You've stopped identifying with the problem. You've stopped repeating the old story. You've let the past lose its meaning. And because of this, the law has nothing to echo but your new state. And that state is one of abundance remembered, not created. You give now from that place, not to impress, but because you overflow. You imagine now not to fix, but to extend beauty. You assume now not to get, but because you know every assumption is an invitation for form to obey. And so your imagination becomes your temple. Your inner world becomes your real dwelling. You feel yourself surrounded by wealth, and you do not leave that scene. You feel the softness of freedom, and live from it before the facts arrive. And when they do, you smile, not with surprise, but with still joy. It is written, before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. This is not a promise to a few. It is the law responding to all who dwell in the end, not those who visit occasionally, but those who remain, even in the silence. And now in that silence, a new question rises, not from urgency, but from clarity. If I am truly the cause, if I am truly the one shaping the mirror, what new world will I quietly give myself permission to reflect? What assumption would I dare to hold, not for gain, but for glory? And if the world is your mirror, if every circumstance is only the echo of what you've assumed, then the highest act is not to strive for change, but to choose your reflection with reverence, to decide quietly which world you are willing to call home, not with effort, but with identity. You feel this now, not as ambition, but as awakening. You no longer look outward to determine what's real. You look inward and feel what's true. And that feeling becomes law, not because you convinced the world, but because you withdrew your consent from appearances and gave it to the unseen. This is what it means to walk by faith, and not by sight, not as a denial of form, but as dominion over it. You no longer seek permission from conditions. You speak the silent yes of assumption, and the world obeys, not because it's being changed, but because it is being reformed by your persistent inner knowing. You are no longer reacting, you are radiating. And that radiation is subtle but sovereign. It carries no strain, no pleading, no hesitation. It simply is. It does not ask, will it come? It knows. It has already been received. And in that knowing, time collapses. 3 days or less is no longer a limit. It's a language, a symbol of the holy interval between the moment you accept your desire as done and the moment it must appear. Whether in hours or heartbeats, it does not matter. The timing is not your concern, the state is. And the more natural that state becomes, the less you look for evidence. You do not say, when will it happen? You say it is already mine. You do not wait for the bank to confirm. You wait for nothing, because you are no longer dependent on proof. You are dependent only on presence, and that presence has become your permanent address. You dwell now in the consciousness of already having, and because of this everything shifts. The phone rings, the offer comes, the unexpected money lands in your account. The doors open, not because you forced them, but because you assumed they already have. And the world, having no choice but to mirror your being, complies. But it feels ordinary now, not because it's small, but because it's natural. You no longer feel the rush of disbelief. You no longer treat manifestation like a miracle. You treat it like breath. You assume it. You feel it. You receive it, as easily as light fills a room when the curtains are drawn. And this simplicity is your true power, because now you're not trying to become the one who manifests. You are the one who manifests. You're not fixing anything. You're revealing what was always waiting for your attention, your devotion, your faithfulness to the end. It is written, the kingdom of God is within you, not outside, not someday, within. The vault is internal, the rich is eternal, and the moment you feel them as yours, the world has no choice but to reflect that treasure in visible form. So you don't force, you don't plead, you don't ask again. You return, in silence, to the feeling of already being wealthy, already secure, already in possession of all you once longed for. And in that return, you are met, not by a delay, but by a bridge, a path, a sequence of events that unfolds not by effort, but by alignment. And just beyond this knowing, another layer reveals itself. Not more technique, not more striving, just one quiet question, pulsing with the fullness of who you now remember yourself to be. If every assumption becomes form, what else have I been unknowingly consenting to? And what would shift if I chose now, once and for all, to withdraw my agreement from lack entirely? And if you truly did withdraw every silent agreement you ever made with lack, if you stopped signing your name beneath old beliefs of waiting, of delay, of not yet, what would unfold? What would rise to meet you if you no longer carried the frequency of absence, but lived fully in the tone of already having? You begin to feel the echo of every unconscious no you've spoken, not aloud but in doubt, in hesitation, in those subtle inner shrugs of maybe someday. And now, with clarity as soft as breath, you rewrite them. You say yes now, not with strain, but with surrender. You say yes to wealth as already here. You say yes to receiving without resistance. You say yes to the rhythm of the law that needs no coaxing, only consistency. Because the moment you stop agreeing with lack, lack loses its mirror. It can no longer appear where it is no longer invited. You are not resisting it. You are forgetting it. You are starving it of your awareness. And as you starve it, you feed the reality of abundance, which has been waiting quietly behind every moment of imagined delay. This is why your shift doesn't take time. It takes decision, not the outer decision of action, but the inner movement of selection, the holy act of choosing again, not by willpower, not by effort, but by alignment with who you already are in spirit. And when you choose from identity, not from lack, the world must obey, because the world does not act independently. It does not create, it reflects. You are the creator, the former of shapes, the animator of conditions. And once you decide, truly decide, that wealth is your nature, the forms scramble to match, the clients respond, the payment clears, the opportunity reveals itself, but not to impress you, to keep up with you. You assumed it, and the world, being faithful to your assumption, brings it to pass. You are no longer surprised when it comes. You no longer ask for reassurance. You no longer touch the scene every hour like a fragile wish. You leave it alone, because it is done. And in that stillness, the manifestation rushes toward you, not as an effort returned, but as a reflection revealed. You are beginning to see, assumption is not a technique. It is the name of the self you've chosen to be. It is not something you do once and forget. It is the ground you now walk on, the breath you now breathe, the lens through which every moment is received. You are no longer imagining a life of wealth. You are living it, invisibly at first, but no less real. And from that invisible state, the visible world bends. It is written, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, not as he wishes, not as he hopes, but as he feels to be true. And you have chosen the feeling of truth, of wealth as your present reality, of riches as your natural atmosphere, of support as constant, of money as obedient. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You don't even need to explain it to yourself. You simply feel it, and allow. You hear the whisper of doubt and smile, not with fear, but compassion. That voice was only the echo of an old identity, one that needed reassurance, one that didn't yet know it was the operant power. But you know now. You no longer seek confirmation. You create it. You no longer search for signs. You understand that your sustained assumption is the sign, and the rest must follow. And now, as you feel the silence deepen, soft, luminous, full, you sense that you are ready to move not just into receiving, but into radiating. If I no longer need to attract wealth, how might I begin to emanate it? Not as a thing I have, but as something I am. And if you no longer need to attract wealth, if you've remembered that you are the source, then you begin to notice the world shifting in ways that feel less like outcomes and more like reflections. You're not pulling anything toward you. You're emanating from within, and everything is responding to that signal. There is no need to grasp, no need to perform. You no longer try to become magnetic. You realize you already are, because all things are drawn to the tone you carry, and your tone has become one of certainty, quiet, unshakable, fulfilled. You walk into a room and feel the air respond, not from ego, but from energy. Not because you need attention, but because your being is aligned. The frequency of already having radiates from you like a fragrance, subtle, invisible, but unmistakably present. This is the essence of true wealth, not the money itself, but the atmosphere you carry when you know it's yours, the feeling of safety before the deposit, the lightness of breath before the number arrives, the thankfulness that rises, not in response to the manifestation, but as the cause of it. Because thankfulness is the language of the end. Gratitude is not a reaction, it is the assumption made flesh. You give thanks for the money, not because you see it, but because you felt it as done. And that feeling now walks with you. It colors your tone, it shapes your speech, it becomes the default setting of your inner world. And so wealth no longer arrives as surprise, it arrives as sequence. One form after another flows into view, because you stopped treating your desire like something distant. You brought it home, you fed it your attention, you clothed it in your faith, you assumed it with so much ease. The law had no choice but to obey. It always does. Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it shall be yours. These are not poetic words, they are precise instructions. To believe you have received before you see the thing, that is the moment of conception, and all else is delivery. You have conceived the state, and the delivery is underway. It comes not from effort, but from alignment, from being the one who has, from refusing to argue with your vision, from refusing to consent to the world's idea of delay, struggle or lack. You have stopped consenting to poverty, and because of that, the world must stop showing it to you. You are no longer tuned to the frequency of need. You are broadcasting the signal of plenty, and everything within the field of your assumption must respond. The deal closes, the transfer lands, the timing aligns, the right words come, the resistance falls away, and still you do not chase results. You stay where it matters, in the end, in the scene, in the quiet knowledge that reality is yours. the moment you feel it so, and so you walk, breathe, speak, and live as the version of you who knows nothing is missing. And when you spend, you do so without fear. When you speak, you do so from joy. When you imagine, you do so from completion. This is the new rhythm, not effort, but embodiment, not reaching, but radiating. And as you live in this rhythm, manifestation becomes something much larger than the money itself. It becomes a mirror of your return. You are remembering who you've always been, the operant power, the voice behind the scene, the unseen cause of all visible wealth. You do not pray for provision. You speak from the fullness of provision. You do not ask for a sign. You become one. But what would shift if you expanded this same awareness to every desire you've ever held? What if money was only the first veil, and the true richness was discovering, you can assume anything, and so it is. And if money was only the first veil, only the most familiar face of form through which you learned your power, then what waits behind it is not just more wealth, but more wonder. Because once you've remembered that assumption is creation, you begin to see every desire not as distance, but as a doorway, not as something to chase, but as something to claim. And so you look at your life not as a map of delays, but as a canvas of open choices. No more compartmentalizing the spiritual from the material. No more saying this is easy, and that is harder. You feel the shift inside you, soft and strong, where all desire becomes equal. Because to the law, all things are one thing, states. The law does not care whether it is $1 or $1 million, whether it is healing, love, favor, or freedom. It only responds to your dwelling place, and you have made your dwelling in the end, not occasionally, not when conditions are perfect, but as a practice of being, a devotion to truth. And in that devotion, the illusions begin to fall, not just around money, but around every area where you once believed you had to wait, to earn, to deserve. You see now how false that was. You were never waiting. You were always assuming. Even when you didn't know it, you were living from an idea of yourself. And the world was simply reflecting that idea, faithfully, consistently. But now you choose deliberately. Now you stop mid-thought and revise it in love. Now you hear the voice of doubt and answer it not with fear, but with vision. You return to your inner scene, not as escape, but as home. You sit in the memory of the future, and it becomes your now, and that now becomes the point of power. From here, all things flow, not by action, but by alignment, not by struggle, but by stillness. You assume the state, and the state assumes you. It wraps around your being like breath, like sunlight, like the garment of your true self finally worn again. This is why it works so quickly now, not because of some trick, but because you no longer fight the process. You no longer inject the state with hesitation. You remain, you abide, you trust, you speak the words inwardly. It is mine, it is done, it is here. And they are no longer declarations to the outer world. They are reminders to your inner one. And from that inner certainty, money flows, opportunities align, unexpected messages find you. But you're no longer surprised, because you've stopped living by logic. You live now by law, by vibration, by identity, and even more, you live by love. Because love is what you feel when you stop doubting your worth, when you stop delaying your joy, when you stop negotiating with reality, and simply decide to become the one who has. This is the still power of assumption, not loud, not urgent, but absolute. And so you ask less, you rest more, you visualize not from absence, but from celebration. You hold the scene of the wish fulfilled, not with tension, but with affection. And as you hold it, life forms around it, effortlessly, obediently. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. You understand now what that means. The Lord is your imagination, and to delight in it is to dwell joyfully in the end, knowing the rest is already unfolding. So if you can choose any state, any version of you, any form of freedom, what will you assume next? Not to fix a problem, but to unveil the next dimension of your true self. Not to attract, but to radiate. Not to reach, but to reveal. And as that question rises from the quiet, what will I assume next? Not to fix, but to reveal. You feel the old way of desiring fall away. No longer are you begging life to give you something. No longer are you using imagination as a tool for escape. You've entered the temple of self, and you stand now at the altar, not with petitions, but with presence. You no longer ask, can I have this? You ask only, who am I willing to be? Because everything you see, everything you hold, everything you experience is not the result of what you want, but of who you are being. And the being always comes first. The world does not give it to you. The world confirms it. So when you say, I am wealthy, it is not an attempt to persuade the world. It is a statement of identity. It is a remembering. And that remembering becomes rhythm. And that rhythm becomes reality. This is the hidden in plain sight. That assumption is not performance. It is embodiment. And as you live from the end, not perform it, not wish it, but live it with sincerity and ease, you no longer need to convince the world of anything. You've let go of outcomes. You've let go of waiting. You've let go of needing to prove it's working. Because you've already seen the fruits. You've felt the inward shift, and you trust now that the outer will follow, not because you force it, but because it must. Law is not an option. It is a certainty. And once you assume a thing to be true and persist in that state, without contradiction, the world has no power to withhold it. It is done. And in that doneness, you rest. You don't question whether the money is coming. You know it is already present, already in motion, already forming. And so you become soft. You become light. You become patient, not as one who waits, but as one who knows. And this knowing becomes the atmosphere around you. People begin to notice something different. Circumstances loosen, tension dissolves. Without effort, the right words fall into place. The unexpected email arrives. The door you weren't even looking for swings open. And you recognize the movement, not as a miracle, but as reflection, not as luck, but as law. It is written, let the weak say, I am strong. Not because they feel it yet, not because it is proven, but because the act of speaking from the end creates the strength. The act of assuming generates the experience. And now you speak wealth into being the same way. You sit with the version of yourself who has already received. You feel their posture, their peace, their indifference to delay, their joy without proof. You feel it until it feels like you. And the moment it does, it is. You become the one who already has. And in becoming you receive. Not in 3 months, not in theory, but in 3 days or less. Because time no longer governs your results. Assumption does. And your assumption is no longer temporary. It is who you are. You walk through your day, and it walks with you. You eat, and it sits beside you. You breathe, and it breathes through you. The state is no longer something you return to. It is something you live from. And now you find yourself drawn to more than just the manifestation of money. You are drawn to the manifestation of vision, of joy, of expansion, of alignment so deep. You no longer measure what arrives by its form, but by how faithfully it reflects your truth. And still the law remains, unchanging, unwavering, exact. What if the only delay left is the time it takes you to stop asking and start remembering, to stop chasing the thing, and become the one who never needed to? What might move when you no longer wait for it, because you are already walking with it? And if you are already walking with it, if the thing you once pursued now walks silently at your side, then every trace of waiting falls away like a forgotten dream. You are no longer trying to make it real. You are no longer checking for proof. You are no longer living in the middle. You have stepped into the end, and the end has received you. You feel the difference. It's in the way your breath softens without you trying. It's in the way the desire no longer burns. It glows. It no longer pulls on your attention. It rests inside your being, like a fulfilled promise echoing through every quiet moment. You have moved beyond seeking. You have remembered, and what you remember becomes your rhythm. There's no longer a sense of needing to do more, to get clearer, to visualize again. You don't touch the scene because it is fragile. You let it be, because it is complete. You live as the one who already received, not just in your imagination, but in your posture, your tone, your way of being. And from this state, life bends to serve you. It doesn't arrive with fanfare, but with precision. The email that was delayed is suddenly answered. The account updates. The money moves, not because you made it happen, but because you became the one for whom it must happen. And the law, having no choice, reflects the new identity. This is not wishful thinking. This is law. It is written, to him that hath more shall be given. Not to him who tries, not to him who begs, but to him who hath, who assumes possession inwardly, and in assuming, attracts the echo of what is already felt to be true. You assume, and the form conforms. You rest, and the world rearranges. You say inwardly, I am the one who has, and the outer begins to obey, not because you told it to, but because you withdrew your permission from every thought of lack and replaced it with being. You don't need to be louder. You need to be stiller. You don't need to prove the law. You need only to stop arguing with it. You need only to stay faithful to the end. And faithfulness, here, is not endurance. It is embodiment. It is living from the feeling until the feeling is no longer a practice. It is your nature. And when it becomes your nature, manifestation becomes your echo. The things you once dreamed of begin to flow toward you, not as miracles, but as inevitabilities. They appear where you are, because you stopped leaving the state where they live. You stopped wandering into not yet, and chose to remain in it is done. And the peace that follows, it cannot be overstated. Because when you no longer feel the need to ask, to check, to hope, the pressure dissolves. And in the absence of pressure, receiving becomes simple, gentle, fast. 3 days is no longer a goal, it's a formality, a sacred number, yes, but not a limit. It marks the interval between self-forgetting and self-realization, and the more deeply you accept the realized self, the shorter the interval becomes. You wake up already feeling the money in your hands. You walk through your day hearing echoes of it around you. You drift to sleep, not wondering, but feeling grateful, and the very next day, the outer reflects back what the inner already knew. But the most miraculous thing is how ordinary it feels. No fireworks, no trembling, just the calm arrival of what you stopped chasing and started being. And now, the invitation opens further, soft, sacred, undeniable. If I could manifest this so easily, what else have I been unknowingly postponing, simply by forgetting that I already am the one who has it? What other forms might rush in, if I dared to assume again, not with effort, but with love? And if love is the energy behind assumption, if all creation flows most purely through affection, then what happens when you fall in love with the feeling of already having? Not with obsession, not with craving, but with reverence, with joy, with a kind of soft sacred celebration that lingers long after the scene has faded from your inner eye. You do not reach for the desire now like something foreign. You embrace it like something long known. You hold it close not to possess it, but to remember it. Because when you assume with love, the state wraps itself around you. It inhabits your body. It breathes with you. And the world can no longer pretend it does not hear. You become unmissable to the form that matches your feeling. It seeks you, as surely as light seeks space. The bridge begins to unfold without your permission, because it doesn't need it. It only needs your being. And you are being the one who has, effortlessly now, gently, naturally. You do not will the money to come. You do not push. You do not plead. You sit with the feeling of wealth, as though it has always belonged to you. You rehearse no longer. You simply live from it. You taste the freedom. You sense the clarity. You feel your inner atmosphere soften, warmed by the presence of that which no longer feels far away. This is why it comes quickly. Not because you became more powerful, but because you stopped pretending you weren't. You dropped the mask of doubt, and the face of truth looked out through your imagination. And that face was not waiting. It was remembering. It is written, according to your faith, be it unto you. And what is faith if not the art of remaining faithful to a feeling, even before it becomes form, not forcing the world to show up, but refusing to leave the state once you've entered it. You stay in the end because it is beautiful there. You rest there, not as strategy, but as devotion. You build no plans for failure. You open no exit door back to the version of yourself who hoped and feared. You remain in the fulfilled scene until it colors your thoughts, tones your words, softens your gaze. And in that state you give freely. You are no longer afraid of loss. You are no longer counting the hours. You are no longer using your senses to confirm what you already decided within. And so the evidence appears, not as a reward, but as a reflection, a balance updated, a gift offered, a payment processed, without explanation. And even then, you smile, not with shock, but with the quiet joy of recognition. Of course it came. Of course it was already done. Because you didn't imagine for it. You imagined from it. And from that sacred space, it became not just likely, but inevitable. You do not repeat the assumption now. You return to the feeling. You saturate yourself with the atmosphere of already having. Not because you are waiting for it to happen, but because you are living where it already has. And now, you begin to wonder, if this state can change my world so quickly, what would happen if I never left it? What would unfold, not just in 3 days, but in every day that follows, if I never again consented to lack, if I gave up the habit of hoping, and became one who simply knows? And if you chose never to leave the state again, if you let go, once and for all, of the identity that questions, doubts, delays, what kind of life would unfold before you? What kind of rhythm would emerge if you allowed the feeling of already having to become your permanent residence? Not a fleeting visit, not a performance for results, but a dwelling. You begin to feel what that means, not in theory, but in the subtle shift of your presence. The way you carry yourself without needing to explain, the way your breath steadies without conscious effort, the way you stop reaching because there is nothing to reach for. You already are, and the state you live in, this inner mansion of fulfillment, is no longer a scene you return to. It is the air around you, the silence within you, the tone behind every word you speak, every step you take, every glance you give. You do not visualize as a means to an end. You feel as the end itself. You feel the money, not because you need it to come, but because it's already part of the self you've become. The numbers don't surprise you anymore. They reflect you. They reflect the inner tone you now carry, without interruption. You stop leaving the state, and so the world stopped taking time. You're not bending reality. You're becoming its author again. And when the world looks unchanged, when the facts whisper otherwise, you smile, because you know that's just an old echo. It is not prophecy. It is not power. It's only the last flicker of a former state you no longer identify with. You do not wrestle with the delay. You don't rehearse the problem. You return gently to your assumption like a lover to their home. You hold the knowing, not tightly, but intimately. You don't need to protect it. You don't need to force it. You only need to remain, to let the stillness grow louder than the facts, and the feeling stronger than the doubt. And in that stillness, the bridge forms, the call comes, the number aligns. The path you couldn't have planned appears beneath your feet, and it doesn't feel like magic, it feels like memory. You feel it as though it had already happened, because in your world, it is written, before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. This is not mysticism, it is precision. The answer flows the moment the inner state becomes consistent. The law doesn't wait for perfect technique, it waits for unwavering identity. You've become unwavering, not by effort, but by choice. You have chosen the end, and you do not apologize for it. You do not explain it away to those who haven't remembered yet. You do not perform belief, you rest in it. You walk through the world, not as a student of the law, but as its embodiment. And so it must obey. The wealth must appear, the message must arrive, the sum must transfer, and it all feels peaceful, not explosive, not dramatic, just right. As though the world is finally catching up to what you've been living all along, and now another layer opens before you, a layer not of more, but of less, less trying, less fixing, less needing to manage the how. What if you surrendered the last thread of control, and allowed the law to carry you fully into the life that matches your assumption? What would unfold, not because you worked for it, but because you became the one who no longer needed to? And if you truly let go of that final thread, if you stop managing the process, analyzing the how, measuring the delay, what would rise in its place? What would move toward you if you no longer stood in the doorway, asking when it will arrive, but simply stepped inside the room, already home? You begin to feel the difference, not as a concept, but as a calm. The atmosphere within you changes. The thoughts are fewer. The questions grow quiet. There is no sense of urgency left to chase away. You are no longer moving through time. You are moving from truth, and truth does not wait. Truth simply is. You realize the control you once clung to was never power. It was resistance in disguise. It was the old self, afraid to trust the invisible, still asking for proof before relaxing into peace. But you don't ask anymore. You know, and that knowing becomes stillness. Not the stillness of passivity, but the stillness of power. The kind of quiet that bends the world without force. The kind of stillness that says, it is done, and feels it, deeply, with no need for evidence, no plea for reassurance. This is where the law moves fastest, because you've stopped pushing against it. You've stopped sending mixed messages to the mirror of reality. You've chosen one state, and you've stayed there. Not as discipline, but as devotion. Not as struggle, but as remembrance. You have remembered who you are, the operant power, the one who selects the end, and lives from it, the one who speaks from completion, not toward it. And so the world reflects it, quickly, quietly, clearly, clearly. Money flows not because you earned it, but because you embodied it. Opportunities arrive, not because you searched for them, but because you became the one they were always seeking. People offer, circumstances are. You recognize it not as something to chase, but as an invitation to become even more of yourself. You start to understand desire in a new way, not as something outside pulling you forward, but as something within, asking to be seen, felt, embodied, not acquired, assumed. And the moment you assume it without resistance, the moment you say yes to the version of yourself who already has it, creation is complete. You may not see the form right away. You may not hear the confirmation immediately, but you don't need to, because you're no longer waiting. You're walking, and this walk is sacred. Every step you take from the end reshapes the world around you, not through pressure, through presence. You become like a magnet, not because you are trying to attract, but because your state is so stable, so saturated with the feeling of already having, that all things begin to gather around your tone. You no longer ask, what should I do? You begin to ask, who would I be if I let this fulfillment lead me? And the answers are not intellectual, they rise quietly. A conversation you didn't expect, a decision that feels obvious, an impulse to move, call, act. But none of it feels like effort. It flows, like water finds the slope. Because once you have assumed, the law arranges the rest. This is the promise hidden in stillness. It is written, behold, I do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth, shall ye not know it? The new thing does not begin in the world, it begins in you. And when you feel it fully enough, when you live from it faithfully enough, the springing forth becomes effortless. You are not creating from scratch, you are revealing what was always prepared. And the more you live in the state of already having, the more obvious this becomes. What felt like chance becomes precision, what looked like coincidence becomes orchestration, and the wealth that once seemed distant becomes background. Because it's no longer your focus, it's simply your reflection. You do not look at the mirror to make it change. You change, and the mirror must reflect you. So now you let go of the urge to monitor. You release the old habit of checking. You do not ask the world for confirmation. You ask your feeling, am I living from the end? And if the answer is yes, then it is done. You go about your day with the calm joy of fulfillment. You spend without shrinking. You speak without seeking validation. You imagine without tension. You sleep in the comfort of the state chosen, knowing that the bridge of incidents is already unfolding, even in your dreams. And with this rest comes a deeper vision, one you didn't plan, a vision that doesn't just ask, what can I get? But what new expression of who I am I ready to assume next, simply because it feels like freedom, simply because it reflects what I already know myself to be. And if freedom is simply the permission to express who you already are, without delay, without compromise, then manifestation becomes not a tool, but a mirror. Not a trick for the few, but the natural rhythm of the one who knows I am always being revealed. So you no longer use imagination to escape where you are. You use it to see more clearly who you've already become. You don't create out of desperation. You create out of devotion. Devotion to the self. Devotion to the tone of already having. Devotion to the inner temple that is never in need, never in lack, never in fear. And in this devotion, life opens, without resistance, without delay, without pleading. You assume wealth, and wealth flows, not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. Not because you figured out the perfect method, but because you finally stopped wavering between the old self and the true one. You chose to live in the end, and call it home. You no longer glance backward. You do not repeat the prayer. You no longer re-enter the scene with tension. You have let the assumption become your resting place, and the resting place has become your reality. You feel yourself now as the one who already has, and it's quiet. There is no loud affirmation. There is no frantic energy. There is no bargaining with life. Just the stillness of fulfillment. Just the warmth of knowing. And from that knowing, movement. The kind you don't chase, but the kind that reaches for you. A message appears, an account updates, a sum lands, a need dissolves before it even becomes visible. You didn't rush it, you didn't beg for it, you didn't check the calendar. You stayed in the end, and the world rearranged itself around your being. It is written, Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. And the Father is your imagination, your inner I am, the self that sees no separation between asking and having, between thought and thing. You've returned to that self now, and in that return, something deeper emerges, not a louder desire, but a purer one. You begin to imagine, not from what do I want, but from what is true of me now that I am no longer doubting. Not what do I need to fix, but what do I now allow, as one who already lives in the solution. And the answers don't come with effort. They rise like a tide. You see new scenes, not from force, but from ease. You find yourself smiling at the life that is already unfolding, not someday, but now, because you're not waiting for reality to show you who you are. You're showing reality what to become. So you let it come, you let it come, you let it come with joy. You let it come in stillness. You let it come while you are washing dishes, walking through the park, lying down in rest. You do not need to grip it anymore. You are held by it. And what holds you now is not theory, it is law. And as you breathe in that law, another sacred wondering begins to form. If this peace is what creates all things, and I never needed to struggle, what happens when I give myself to it completely, and let my entire life, not just a moment, not just a sum, but my entire being, be shaped by the end I've already chosen? And what if giving yourself fully to the end wasn't a leap, but a return? Not the start of something new, but the end of forgetting. What if the life you dream of is not waiting ahead, but quietly glowing beneath every breath, waiting only for your permission to appear? You feel that question settle like warm light in your chest. It doesn't ask for analysis, it asks for surrender. And not the surrender of passivity, but the sacred release of effort. The soft inward yes, that lets the state of already having become your natural atmosphere. Because the moment you stop dipping in and out of your assumption, the moment you stop asking, is it working? And instead say, of course it is, because I am now the one who has, the world must comply. The outer is only a mirror, and the mirror never moves first. You do. You feel now the steady rhythm of that truth. Not dramatic, not loud, but sure. The way your inner world responds when you live from the version of you who no longer seeks, the one who no longer performs worthiness, the one who simply knows. You no longer try to get into the state. You realize you were never out of it, only distracted from it, only momentarily convinced by appearances. But appearances are the past. They are shadows cast by former thoughts. You are no longer the one who bows to shadows. You are the light that forms them. And as you live as that light, money becomes obedient. It moves not as reward, but as echo. You feel the assumption of wealth as your baseline. Not something to touch occasionally, but something that touches everything you do. It informs how you speak, how you give, how you sleep. And in that saturation, the 3 days become irrelevant. They are no longer a time frame. They are a symbol, a whisper of the holy pattern, death of the old, rest in the unseen, resurrection of the new. But you no longer need to wait for the 3rd day. You are living from the risen state now. You've walked through the inner tomb of silence. You've laid down the self that doubts. You've stepped out wrapped in the garments of fulfillment. And the world, seeing only what you reflect, begins to rise around you. This is how the law moves. Not when you ask, but when you assume. Not when you hope, but when you rest. Not when you wait, but when you embody. It is written, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And now you live in that evidence, not waiting for it to become visible, but honoring it in feeling until the form arrives without fanfare, because it is no longer surprising, it is expected. And this is the tone that manifests huge sums. This is the energy that collapses time. Not urgency, not begging, but the deep, rich stillness of someone who finally stopped asking for permission to live from their desire. You live from it now, and the state speaks louder than your words. You don't need to tell the world who you are. It recognizes you. You don't need to explain the change. It reflects it. You don't need to convince your mind. Your feeling has already accepted it. And once accepted, it is done. And so you walk on, not toward the result, but with it. And as the days pass, or the hours, or the minutes, you feel them not as delays, but as sacred space for the bridge to form beneath your feet. You trust the law. You trust the state. And more than anything, you trust yourself. But what if even the bridge itself is optional? What if now that you've stopped wavering, you're already there, and the money is simply arriving to greet you, exactly on time? And what if the bridge was never built from steps, but from surrender? What if it formed not beneath your actions, but beneath your identity? What if the moment you stopped trying to get there, you realized you'd never left? Because when you stop waiting for reality to confirm your state, you begin to see clearly it already has, in subtle ways, in quiet echoes, in the shift of tone around you. The world has started speaking the language of your assumption. Not because you commanded it, but because you remembered the only thing that was ever needed was to feel it done. You don't need to make it real. You only need to stop imagining that it isn't. And so you wake in the morning, not with a list of things to attract, but with the awareness that your state has already gathered them. You rest your mind in the softness of already having. You speak gently, confidently, not as one seeking validation, but as one who has nothing left to prove. Because when you are, you no longer need to ask. You move as the one whose desire is a memory. You walk through rooms as the one whose account already holds the number. You receive messages not with surprise, but with a smile, because you knew they had to come. They were written in the script of your assumption. This is why you can manifest large sums quickly, because you've stopped vibrating with lack. You've stopped arguing with appearances. You've stopped calling it hard. You've stopped waiting for evidence to grant you permission to feel free. You gave yourself the permission first, and the world bowed. It is written, let the weak say, I am strong. Not because the outer confirms it, but because your word is the seed, and the seed does not require external validation to grow. It requires a consistent environment, and that environment is the state, the feeling, the inner climate of your being, and your climate now is wealth. Not wealth as something acquired, but wealth as something embodied. You spend freely, not recklessly, but peacefully. You imagine generously, not desperately, but delightfully. You move through your day without gripping outcomes, because the outcome is already known. It is written in the stillness of your tone, and that tone reshapes reality, without effort, without force. Because tone is not volume, it's vibration, and vibration precedes manifestation, always. So you let the tone of already having remain. You don't dress it up. You don't force emotion. You simply let it be true, and that truth settles into your system like breath. And you wonder now gently, without urgency, how would I live if I knew the money was already here, just not yet seen? What would I allow myself to feel, if I truly believed there is no delay, only the quiet blooming of what I've already planted? You feel the answer before you think it. You'd relax, you'd smile, you'd stop repeating yourself to the universe. You'd spend a little differently. You'd walk a little lighter. You'd look at the inbox, the calendar, the mailbox, not as a source of hope, but as a mirror of what is already done. And in that subtle shift, you realize something extraordinary. Maybe you've already crossed the bridge. Maybe this is the other side. Maybe the money isn't coming. Maybe it's arriving. Maybe the delay is done. And the final act is simply to let it feel natural. And what else might become natural, now that you've made fulfillment your new normal? What other miracles might become mundane, not because they've lost their beauty, but because they've finally become your baseline? And if miracles became your new normal, if the extraordinary began to feel expected, would you not walk a little slower, speak a little softer, breathe a little deeper? Not because you have less to do, but because you've realized the doing is no longer your burden. The being is. You are no longer shaping the world with effort. You're shaping it with state. And when the state is one of fulfillment, quiet, sure, gently glowing, the world bends around you like light through water. It doesn't resist. It reflects. It answers with precision, because your assumption no longer wavers. Your tone no longer fluctuates. Your inner climate is constant, and the harvest flows accordingly. This is why it begins to feel like ease, because you're no longer resisting your own truth. The wealth isn't something you've summoned. It's something you've stopped denying. And the moment you stop denying it, the delay ends, because it was never life that withheld. It was only your identification with the version of yourself who didn't yet believe. But that version is gone now. You've moved into the self who knows, the one who breathes abundance like air, the one who looks at a closed door and smiles, knowing it was never their door to begin with, and the right one is already open. You don't knock, you walk through, because the bridge isn't built ahead of you. It forms beneath your feet, step by step, scene by scene, assumption by assumption, not in reaction, but in rhythm. And when that rhythm becomes the heartbeat of your life, the manifestations don't feel sudden, they feel natural. Of course the sum appeared. Of course the transfer came. Of course the phone rang. You're no longer waiting for the outcome. You're living in the afterglow. It is written, Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. But the true asking isn't with the lips, it's with the feeling. The seeking isn't in the world, it's in the self. And the knocking is not a plea, but a posture. You knock when you assume, you receive when you remain. And now you've remained long enough for the bridge to vanish, because what was once the path has become your place. You live now in the state, not as a visitor, but as a resident. And the longer you live there, the more real it becomes. You recognize it not as something to chase, but as an invitation to become even more of yourself. You start to understand desire in a new way, not as something outside pulling you forward, but as something within, asking to be seen, felt, embodied, not acquired, assumed. And the moment you assume it without resistance, the moment you say yes to the version of yourself who already has it, creation is complete. You may not see the form right away, you may not hear the confirmation immediately, but you don't need to, because you're no longer waiting. You're walking, and this walk is sacred. Every step you take from the end reshapes the world around you, not through pressure, through presence. You become like a magnet, not because you are trying to attract, but because your state is so stable, so saturated with the feeling of already having, that all things begin to gather around your tone. You no longer ask, what should I do? You begin to ask, who would I be if I let this fulfillment lead me? And the answers are not intellectual, they rise quietly. A conversation you didn't expect, a decision that feels obvious, an impulse to move, call, act. But none of it feels like effort. It flows, like water finds the slope. Because once you have assumed, the law arranges the rest. This is the promise hidden in stillness. It is written, behold, I do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth, shall ye not know it? The new thing does not begin in the world, it begins in you. And when you feel it fully enough, when you live from it faithfully enough, the springing forth becomes effortless. You are not creating from scratch, you are revealing what was always prepared. And the more you live in the state of already having, the more obvious this becomes. What felt like chance becomes precision, what looked like coincidence becomes orchestration, and the wealth that once seemed distant becomes background. Because it's no longer your focus, it's simply your reflection. You do not look at the mirror to make it change. You change, and the mirror must reflect you. So now you let go of the urge to monitor. You release the old habit of checking. You do not ask the world for confirmation. You ask your feeling, am I living from the end? And if the answer is yes, then it is done. You go about your day with the calm joy of fulfillment. You spend without shrinking. You speak without seeking validation. You imagine without tension. You sleep in the comfort of the state chosen, knowing that the bridge of incidents is already unfolding, even in your dreams. And with this rest comes a deeper vision, one you didn't plan, a vision that doesn't just ask, what can I get? But what new expression of who I am I ready to assume next, simply because it feels like freedom, simply because it reflects what I already know myself to be. And if freedom is simply the permission to express who you already are, without delay, without compromise, then manifestation becomes not a tool, but a mirror. Not a trick for the few, but the natural rhythm of the one who knows I am always being revealed. So you no longer use imagination to escape where you are. You use it to see more clearly who you've already become. You don't create out of desperation. You create out of devotion. Devotion to the self. Devotion to the tone of already having. Devotion to the inner temple that is never in need, never in lack, never in fear. And in this devotion, life opens, without resistance, without delay, without pleading. You assume wealth, and wealth flows, not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. Not because you figured out the perfect method, but because you finally stopped wavering between the old self and the true one. You chose to live in the end, and call it home. You no longer glance backward. You do not repeat the prayer. You no longer re-enter the scene with tension. You have let the assumption become your resting place, and the resting place has become your reality. You feel yourself now as the one who already has, and it's quiet. There is no loud affirmation. There is no frantic energy. There is no bargaining with life. Just the stillness of fulfillment. Just the warmth of knowing. And from that knowing, movement. The kind you don't chase, but the kind that reaches for you. A message appears, an account updates, a sum lands, a need dissolves before it even becomes visible. You didn't rush it, you didn't beg for it. You didn't check the calendar. You stayed in the end, and the world rearranged itself around your being. It is written, Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. And the Father is your imagination, your inner I am, the self that sees no separation between asking and having, between thought and thing. You've returned to that self now, and in that return, something deeper emerges, not a louder desire, but a purer one. You begin to imagine, not from what do I want, but from what is true of me now that I am no longer doubting. Not what do I need to fix, but what do I now allow, as one who already lives in the solution. And the answers don't come with effort. They rise like a tide. You see new scenes, not from force, but from ease. You find yourself smiling at the life that is already unfolding, not someday, but now, because you're not waiting for reality to show you who you are. You're showing reality what to become. So you let it come, you let it come, you let it come with joy. You let it come in stillness. You let it come while you are washing dishes, walking through the park, lying down in rest. You do not need to grip it anymore. You are held by it. And what holds you now is not theory, it is law. And as you breathe in that law, another sacred wondering begins to form. If this peace is what creates all things, and I never needed to struggle, what happens when I give myself to it completely, and let my entire life, not just a moment, not just a sum, but my entire being, be shaped by the end I've already chosen? And what if giving yourself fully to the end wasn't a leap, but a return? Not the start of something new, but the end of forgetting. What if the life you dream of is not waiting ahead, but quietly glowing beneath every breath, waiting only for your permission to appear? You feel that question settle like warm light in your chest. It doesn't ask for analysis, it asks for surrender. And not the surrender of passivity, but the sacred release of effort. The soft inward yes, that lets the state of already having become your natural atmosphere. Because the moment you stop dipping in and out of your assumption, the moment you stop asking, is it working? And instead say, of course it is, because I am now the one who has, the world must comply. The outer is only a mirror, and the mirror never moves first. You do. You feel now the steady rhythm of that truth. Not dramatic, not loud, but sure. The way your inner world responds when you live from the version of you who no longer seeks, the one who no longer performs worthiness, the one who simply knows. You no longer try to get into the state. You realize you were never out of it, only distracted from it, only momentarily convinced by appearances. But appearances are the past. They are shadows cast by former thoughts. You are no longer the one who bows to shadows. You are the light that forms them. And as you live as that light, money becomes obedient. It moves not as reward, but as echo. You feel the assumption of wealth as your baseline, not something to touch occasionally, but something that touches everything you do. It informs how you speak, how you give, how you sleep. And in that saturation, the 3 days become irrelevant. They are no longer a time frame. They are a symbol, a whisper of the holy pattern, death of the old, rest in the unseen, resurrection of the new. But you no longer need to wait for the 3rd day. You are living from the risen state now. You've walked through the inner tomb of silence. You've laid down the self that doubts. You've stepped out wrapped in the garments of fulfillment. And the world, seeing only what you reflect, begins to rise around you. This is how the law moves. Not when you ask, but when you assume. Not when you hope, but when you rest. Not when you wait, but when you embody. It is written, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And now you live in that evidence, not waiting for it to become visible, but honoring it in feeling until the form arrives without fanfare, because it is no longer surprising. It is expected. And this is the tone that manifests huge sums. This is the energy that collapses time. Not urgency, not begging, but the deep, rich stillness of someone who finally stopped asking for permission to live from their desire. You live from it now, and the state speaks louder than your words. You don't need to tell the world who you are. It recognizes you. You don't need to explain the change. It reflects it. You don't need to convince your mind. Your feeling has already accepted it. And once accepted, it is done. And so you walk on, not toward the result, but with it. And as the days pass, or the hours, or the minutes, you feel them not as delays, but as sacred space for the bridge to form beneath your feet. You trust the law. You trust the state. And more than anything, you trust yourself. But what if even the bridge itself is optional? What if now that you've stopped wavering, you're already there, and the money is simply arriving to greet you, exactly on time? And what if the bridge was never built from steps, but from surrender? What if it formed not beneath your actions, but beneath your identity? What if the moment you stopped trying to get there, you realized you'd never left? Because when you stop waiting for reality to confirm your state, you begin to see clearly it already has, in subtle ways, in quiet echoes, in the shift of tone around you. The world has started speaking the language of your assumption. Not because you commanded it, but because you remembered the only thing that was ever needed was to feel it done. You don't need to make it real. You only need to stop imagining that it isn't. And so you wake in the morning, not with a list of things to attract, but with the awareness that your state has already gathered them. You rest your mind in the softness of already having. You speak gently, confidently, not as one seeking validation, but as one who has nothing left to prove. Because when you are, you no longer need to ask. You move as the one whose desire is a memory. You walk through rooms as the one whose account already holds the number. You receive messages not with surprise, but with a smile, because you knew they had to come. They were written in the script of your assumption. This is why you can manifest large sums quickly, because you've stopped vibrating with lack. You've stopped arguing with appearances. You've stopped calling it hard. You've stopped waiting for evidence to grant you permission to feel free. You gave yourself the permission first, and the world bowed. It is written, let the weak say, I am strong. Not because the outer confirms it, but because your word is the seed, and the seed does not require external validation to grow. It requires a consistent environment, and that environment is the state, the feeling, the inner climate of your being, and your climate now is wealth. Not wealth as something acquired, but wealth as something embodied. You spend freely, not recklessly, but peacefully. You imagine generously, not desperately, but delightfully. You move through your day without gripping outcomes, because the outcome is already known. It is written in the stillness of your tone, and that tone reshapes reality, without effort, without force. Because tone is not volume, it's vibration, and vibration precedes manifestation, always. So you let the tone of already having remain. You don't dress it up. You don't force emotion. You simply let it be true, and that truth settles into your system like breath. And you wonder now gently, without urgency, how would I live if I knew the money was already here, just not yet seen? What would I allow myself to feel, if I truly believed there is no delay, only the quiet blooming of what I've already planted? You feel the answer before you think it. You'd relax, you'd smile, you'd stop repeating yourself to the universe. You'd spend a little differently. You'd walk a little lighter. You'd look at the inbox, the calendar, the mailbox, not as a source of hope, but as a mirror of what is already done. And in that subtle shift, you realize something extraordinary. Maybe you've already crossed the bridge. Maybe this is the other side. Maybe the money isn't coming. Maybe it's arriving. Maybe the delay is done, and the final act is simply to let it feel natural. And what else might become natural, now that you've made fulfillment your new normal? What other miracles might become mundane, not because they've lost their beauty, but because they've finally become your baseline? And if miracles became your new normal, if the extraordinary began to feel expected, would you not walk a little slower, speak a little softer, breathe a little deeper? Not because you have less to do, but because you've realized the doing is no longer your burden. The being is. You are no longer shaping the world with effort. You're shaping it with state. And when the state is one of fulfillment, quiet, sure, gently glowing, the world bends around you like light through water. It doesn't resist. It reflects. It answers with precision, because your assumption no longer wavers. Your tone no longer fluctuates. Your inner climate is constant, and the harvest flows accordingly. This is why it begins to feel like ease, because you're no longer resisting your own truth. The wealth isn't something you've summoned. It's something you've stopped denying. And the moment you stop denying it, the delay ends, because it was never life that withheld. It was only your identification with the version of yourself who didn't yet believe. But that version is gone now. You've moved into the self who knows, the one who breathes abundance like air, the one who looks at a closed door and smiles, knowing it was never their door to begin with, and the right one is already open. You don't knock, you walk through, because the bridge isn't built ahead of you. It forms beneath your feet, step by step, scene by scene, assumption by assumption, not in reaction, but in rhythm. And when that rhythm becomes the heartbeat of your life, the manifestations don't feel sudden, they feel natural. Of course the sum appeared. Of course the transfer came. Of course the phone rang. You're no longer waiting for the outcome. You're living in the afterglow. It is written, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." But the true asking isn't with the lips, it's with the feeling. The seeking isn't in the world, it's in the self. And the knocking is not a plea, but a posture. You knock when you assume, you receive when you remain. And now you've remained long enough for the bridge to vanish, because what was once the path has become your place. You live now in the state, not as a visitor, but as a resident. And the longer you live there, the more real it becomes, not just inside, but all around. So when the money comes, you don't flinch, you don't gasp, you don't disbelieve. You nod, yes, of course, because it had no choice. The form was always obedient to the feeling. And now that the feeling has stabilized, the world cannot delay what you've already claimed. And so you exhale into the simplicity of this truth. There is no future version of you who is more worthy, more capable, more magnetic than the one who already exists right now. You do not become her. You stop doubting that you are her. And the moment you stop doubting, the moment you believe in softness, not striving, that is the moment it is done. And now you wonder, if this is who I've been all along, what else could unfold, naturally, effortlessly, if I never again forget where I live? If I made my home in the end, and let life deliver everything else to my doorstep, exactly on time? And what if life really could be that simple? If all that was ever asked of you was to stay where you belong, to make your home not in desire, not in hope, not in striving, but in the end, what might rearrange itself around a soul that no longer visits fulfillment but lives there, day after day, breath after breath? You feel it now, don't you? The way that truth softens your chest, the way it slows the thoughts. You are no longer planning your breakthrough. You are sitting in it, no longer calculating how to reach the state. You are resting in it. The assumption has become not a technique, but a tone. And that tone is the new gravity. It pulls everything to it. You no longer manifest by effort. You manifest by resonance. And resonance is not what you want, it's what you are. The frequency you hold when you stop searching and begin dwelling. The silent claim of "I already am." And from that claim the world bows. Not with noise, not with drama, but with accuracy. The message appears, the money lands, the sum arrives, not because you wished it into being, but because you became the one for whom it was already done. You are no longer asking for the table to be set. You are sitting down, unfolding the napkin, and lifting the first bite in gratitude. This is the secret no one teaches, because it cannot be taught. It must be remembered. That manifestation is not about control, it is about consent. You are not forcing the dream into form. You are agreeing with it, aligning with it, saying yes to it, from the inside out. It is written, "He calleth those things which be not as though they were," not as hope, not as fantasy, but as fact. And this calling is not with words. It is with being, with silence, with how you feel when no one is watching, with the invisible assumption that I have received. And because you've received it inwardly, life rushes to fill in the form. You walk into rooms as the one who already owns. You respond to emails as the one who already has. You move through conversations as the one who is no longer asking for validation. And the world, powerless to resist the command of your vibration, delivers accordingly. And you begin to feel something deeper than joy, a kind of holy indifference, not cold, not detached, but peaceful. You no longer need the result to come quickly, and so it does. You no longer need to prove your power, and so it flows freely. You no longer doubt the process, and so it unfolds effortlessly. You stop counting the days. You stop watching the clock. You let the miracle take whatever form it needs to take, because you're no longer waiting to receive. You are living from the one who already has. And now you realize, 3 days was never the limit. It was never the challenge. It was the invitation, the sacred reminder that time is only the echo of belief. That the faster you assume, the shorter the journey becomes. And what else might shorten, collapse, vanish, if you never again stepped out of the end? If the rest of your life became one long sweet breath of already done, already mine, already here, what kind of world might you wake into next? What kind of world might you wake into if you never again forgot where you dwell? If every morning began not with reaching, but with remembering, not with questions, but with the quiet echo of "it is done." If your entire life unfolded not as a search for what you lack, but as the living expression of what you already are. Because something happens when you stop stepping out of the state. The bridges stop needing to be built. The path stops needing to be found. What once looked like progress becomes unnecessary. What once felt like work becomes play. You are not watching for signs, you are walking in them. The miracle is not on its way. The miracle is your breath. The miracle is your stillness. The miracle is your choice, to remain in the vibration of already fulfilled, no matter what the world says in return. And the world will speak back, not because you pushed it, but because you stayed unmoved, because you let go of needing to make it happen. You didn't pace the floor. You didn't beg the heavens. You simply sat in the end and wore it like light, and the light could no longer be ignored. It showed up in the form of unexpected amounts, in accounts adjusted, in debts dissolved, in gifts given, in clients' payments, deposits, raises, not summoned, but synchronized, not asked for, but assumed. And you now know why it happened, not because you were finally ready, but because you finally stopped believing you weren't. The state doesn't care what you've done. It doesn't measure your effort. It only asks one question: who are you now? And if you are now the one who has fully, gently, calmly, then the law answers accordingly. It is written, all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing you shall receive. But the prayer is not words. It is the vibration you carry when you've already said yes to the end, when you are no longer trying to change the dream, but to remain inside the one you've chosen. And that is what you've done. You have chosen the dream where the money comes in days, the one where you live from ease, the one where life reflects your inner wealth, your inner wholeness, your unshakable decision to see yourself as the one who has, and life obeys, effortlessly, lovingly, without resistance. And so the next question rises, not as ambition but as expansion. What would it feel like if I never again left this tone of fulfillment? If the money I manifested in 3 days was just the beginning? If every desire became this simple, this peaceful, this inevitable, and more than that? What if I lived not just in the end, but as it? And if you truly lived as the end, not just in thought, not just in momentary meditation, but as your natural identity, what else would change without your effort? What burdens would dissolve without explanation? What delays would evaporate simply because there was nothing left in you to support them? This is the quiet secret, the one that reveals itself only after the striving has stopped, after the mind has run out of reasons to wait, after the self you once believed you were has bowed to something greater. And that greater is not outside you. It is the you that never left the end. It was always there, waiting in silence, not for more affirmations, not for better effort, just for your agreement. You feel it now, don't you? The peace of no longer circling the same old questions, the calm of no longer searching for signs. You've become the sign. You are the evidence of fulfillment. Not because the world said so, but because your inner world never needed proof. And that changes the outer completely. You're no longer obsessed with timing. You're no longer tracking the how. You're no longer shifting states back and forth like sand in the wind. You've settled. And the law responds to those who settle, who dwell, who rest in the state long enough for it to harden into fact. You no longer try to impress your desire upon reality. You let the desire express itself through you. There is no force in this way of living. There is no striving, only presence, only lightness, only the soft repetition of a sacred truth, spoken not with lips but with tone. I am the one who already has. I am the one for whom this is normal. I am the one who stopped doubting and watched the world bow accordingly. And so the sum arrives, not as a peak moment, but as a reflection, not as a miracle, but as alignment. The number clears, the message comes, the transfer appears, and even as you smile, you do not rush to post it, to prove it, to declare it, because it already matched your identity. It was already true inside you before the digits ever appeared. It is written, thou shalt also decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. But the decree is not only what you say, it's what you feel to be true without needing to defend it, without needing to convince the mind, without needing to perform certainty. And now your being speaks louder than your doing. You don't need to revisit the scene 10 times a day. You live in the feeling beneath the scene. You don't need to visualize the number again. You've already felt its impact, its presence, its weight in your hand. And the 3 days, they feel irrelevant now. They've become fluid, elastic, a formality, not a limit. The desire was never about when, it was about who. And now that you've remembered who you are, you ask not, when will it come? You ask instead, what new beauty shall I now allow, simply because I no longer resist the flow, simply because I have learned that creation doesn't happen when I try harder, but when I stop leaving the end I love.